Safety Commission, thanks for coming on a different night than usual. And Justin, would you please take roll?
I'll do that. Justin is learning the routine.
I'm sorry.
So it's fair. Commissioner Chomsky.
Present.
Commissioner Javadal. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Present.
Commissioner Reeves.
Present.
And Chair McCroskey.
Present. All present and accounted for. Fabulous. We have some minutes from the regular meeting of March 22nd. Do I have any comments on the meeting minutes? We have a move of approval from, I think your mic might be off. Commissioner Javadal moves for approval.
Yes.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Susan seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes pass. That takes us to public comment this evening, and this is a time for those making comments on things that aren't otherwise on the agenda. So if you're here for a particular agenda item, please hang on and we'll have a public comment associated with that particular agenda item. So for anyone now who's interested in making a comment on an item not on the agenda, I ask you to step up and bring a comment card if you have not turned it in yet.
Chair McCroskey, we have a comment card from Sue Douglas with a topic of safety for Cornell schools, and it's both 4 and 6-1. So I don't know. They're
4 and 6-1. Well, it's your lucky night because you can certainly say what you want about safety at Cornell School and then step up again later and address 6-1 separately.
It's a complicated issue. There's lots to say.
So we're going to give you 3 minutes.
Right. Dear members of the Traffic and Safety Commission, fellow parents, grandparents, and other Albanians present, we've been dealing with the issue of our children's safety while going to and from school for close to 10 months. We begged you to keep the crossing guards at the level of the 2016-2017 school year. I understand it's been cut by 1 recently, and we are once again having to fight that battle. However, what I am choosing to address is the lack of controlled access traffic controls at either Marin and Cornell or Marin and Talbot. I must say I was immensely frustrated reading through the other things being proposed with improvements to bike safety and upgrading existing lights with not one thin dime or one mention of the problem that between a traffic accident and injury to one of our children stands one lone brave safety guard. Now, when I talked to Peggy McQuaid about this a while back, she said they were going to install a beacon, and she liked it because it was going to generate its own power. It was going to be solar. I don't see anything in here. I haven't seen any movement on that, nothing. It is still, those kids still have to cross the street with just a crossing guard, and that's all. And that's not enough. That is not safe enough. The other schools have much more safe ways of crossing. The other 2 schools both have traffic lights. Cornell has nothing on either end. And as far as I'm concerned, the values and the priorities are wrong here. Safety of our children should be most important. And adults have died on Marin, not children, but it could be one of them next because traffic does not always slow, does not always obey the crossing guards. When is this going to be addressed? I would like to know, with something, at least a beacon, and that should be a part of Safe Streets for Albany. I realize that most of that has been through a grant, but surely when the streets were open, I talked to one of the foremen on the job, and he said, yeah, it'd be very easy just to install something that was ready for you to put in a signal. Nothing was done. Why? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have 2 other public comment requests, Brian Martin and Celine Wallace.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin, and I wanted to put an inquiry for how the public can engage with the recent safety concerns having to do with the Greenway. My friend Celine here, her husband was held up at gunpoint a few weeks ago, and then of course, we had the shooting yesterday. This commission has the word safety in it. There's police chief here today, and what are some? I know the Traffic and Safety Commission sometimes has working groups. I don't know the actual word when there's certain things that are going on, and we want a lot of input and back and forth. That's less formal than a meeting like this. Is there something like that that this commission can do, or the staff think the city could do?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to address you. My name is Celine Waz. I didn't sleep well last night after the news of the homicide on the Ohlone Greenway. It hit a little too close to home, both literally and figuratively. 4 weeks ago, my husband was robbed at gunpoint on the Ohlone Greenway behind the plaza on what happened to be the El Cerrito side of the Ohlone Greenway that's split between El Cerrito and Albany. He was on his way home to Albany. I want to commend both the El Cerrito and Albany police departments for immediately accepting to speak at a community meeting about safety on the Ohlone Greenway. I also want to commend Mayor Peggy McQuaid and Vice Mayor Rochelle Nason for offering to co-host this meeting, which was scheduled originally for May 23rd. I understand that under the current circumstances, there may be a need to reassess the scope of that meeting. I have done some research about the original master plan for the Ohlone Greenway. There were two sections, one that found their security and one that found their safety that I think is relevant to this commission, but maybe addressed separately. I believe that in all crisis lays the opportunity for coming together as a community to make things better, and I look forward to working together on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And just so it's clear, because of the requirement for noticing of things that are discussed at these meetings, we can't actually take up any of the issues raised in public comment, but we can talk about them later and talk about agendizing. We're going to move forward.
Excuse me, I have
Sorry.
one more.
Oh,
public
please, yes,
comment.
yes.
This is from Ariel Lustig.
Thank you. So perhaps not as urgent, pressing, or tragic as the Ohlone Greenway issue, but I was here to talk about the crossing guard and thought, well, I have this open forum to discuss something else that I've noticed. If you're or just at the stoplight there's some new wires that run across. It's like some new, I don't know if they're fiber optic cables or whatever they are, but they go right in front of where the red lights are. And I've actually tried to take pictures, but I know you're not supposed to take pictures while you're driving, but if you sit at that intersection and you look, you'll see there's actually, they're sort of obstructing, and it would be nice if those could be raised up a bit. So just thought I'd bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we forward that one on to the?
We'll look into that right away.
Great. Thank you.
And then finally, just for the record, there was some correspondence received from one of the businesses along San Pablo who addressed the commission last month regarding the bus stops, and that correspondence has been included in your public comment section, just for the record.
Okay. Thank you. So you're saying online on the agenda?
It's online on the agenda.
Right. Okay.
Available to everyone.
Great. With that, I'd like to move on to item 6.1, an update on school crossing guard program. And I'd like to welcome our Chief of Police, Mike McQuiston. We're glad to have you here tonight. Thanks for making the time.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Talk about important things. Make a little room here. You're not going to limit me to 3 minutes, Mr. Chair? I'm just going to put that over here. So I wanted to begin tonight on this agenda item by giving you the background, and I anticipated that members of the public would be concerned about this and be here, and I want to make sure that we kind of start off from the same foundation of historically what's happened over the last several months. So there's a clear understanding of how we ended up where we're at today. But I'll preface all of that for everyone to hear that it is my intent to recommend to the City Council when I go back before them next month that they fully staff the crossing guard program for next year. So we'll come back to that. So the Albany Police Department, as you know, administers the elementary school crossing guard program. The primary objective of our program is to reduce both the frequency and the severity of traffic accidents involving elementary school children traveling to or from the schools across specified intersections near those schools. This is an ancillary duty for a member of our staff. It's run by a police sergeant, and what we've found over the years is it can be a problematic program to administer. It can be difficult to attract persons to fill these vacancies. They're required to be on post no matter what the weather, and sometimes the weather here is quite cold and wet. The job demands employee be available for most of nearly an 8-hour day, although he or she is only paid for 4.5 hours. It eats up a pretty good chunk of their pay. Or their day. It's relatively low pay, virtually no benefits. When a crossing guard is absent, other police department staff members are forced to fill in, often with little or no notice, and we find it to be very disruptive to what we're trying to do during the day. The workload, the regulatory demands on a contemporary police agency make it a real burden when I have to pull an administrative support person and say, okay, grab your sign and go cover this, these crossings several times throughout the day. So this has a negative effect on our police technicians and the work that they're doing, and our parking enforcement personnel that are trying to do the commercial parking enforcement on Solano and San Pablo, and often police officers as well. It's also, it used to be a year-round job, but now they get laid off every summer. So there's a number of challenges in finding just the right person, and we have some great people in these positions at the moment, but they're kind of they represent maybe the best case where we get someone where this really works for them. Throughout the years that the police department has administered the program, there have periodically been changes. The number of guards, their locations, the times they cross children have all changed, sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing. These changes are usually driven by the unique circumstances of the day, such as school site usage, changing bell schedules, school closure or relocation, construction, things of that sort. Labor agreements, because they are all union employees, and city fiscal conditions, which is what we're primarily dealing with this year. When possible, the police department has also attempted to make the program more efficient and less onerous for us to administer. And so the periodic changes to the program over the years, we typically coordinate between the police and the school that's affected, communicating with the affected school site and with the school population. So let's see. So until 2009, the Albany Police Department provided 4 crossing guards for Cornell and Marin School. We had two at each of those schools, while the University Village was responsible for crossing guard services for children in the vicinity of Ocean View School. And in 2009, there was the situation with the economy and whatnot, and at one point, I approached the school district to see if they wanted to take on this program, but they would, of course, they wouldn't hear of it. Not our current superintendent. It was a prior superintendent that I spoke to. And over the years, I've floated ideas to use volunteers, school staff, PTA to cover absences, not necessarily to run the program, but when we have an absence that we anticipate is going to happen. But there's really been no significant interest in that over the years as well. So in 2009, the UC Village management approached me and asked if we would be interested in providing contracted services to meet their longstanding commitment for Ocean View. And I agreed to an MOU with them where we would cover Ocean View School, but they would pay for the guards. As a consequence of that, we ended up with those 6 guards on our payroll, 2 for each elementary school. So that began in the 2009-2010 school year, and it covered a 5-year period. That memorandum of understanding was for 5 years, from 2009 to 2014. And let's see. In 2014, the city and UC agreed to extend the MOU for a second 5-year period that would expire in June of 2019. Because of the way that I structured the MOU in my negotiations with them originally, what ended up happening was our cost recovery was actually 50%, about 50% of the total cost of the program, including the program labor costs. So we ended up employing the 6, but in essence, when we billed them, because of the rate we were billing them that we had agreed to, it paid for 3 of those 6, even though we were providing them with their 2. Let's see. So yes, I have it in my notes here. It was approximately 54% of the annual crossing guard program budget we were getting from them. Last year, at the end of the school year, the UC Village Management notified me that they would be terminating their agreement prematurely, effective July 1 of 2017, due to budget problems. Because the revenue from UC represented so much of our budget, this was a pretty significant change. So as the department head in charge of that, I was tasked with figuring out, now what do we do? We've lost 50% of our program revenue. And so I wanted to come up with something that would be equitable for the 3 schools, instead of simply saying, well, those 2 guards at Ocean View are no longer paid for, so Ocean View will no longer have crossing guards. I said, if we're losing 50% of the budget, then we go down to 50% of staffing, and each school gets 1 guard. This was what I had to do given where I was heading into the summer and the budget having already been set for the following year. I also, I anticipated that this was not going to just kind of happen, right? So having been involved in administrating this program for 20 years or so, I realized that this would kickstart a little activity around this, and we would see where we would go. And I also know that City Council would be very interested in trying to find a way to fix this problem. So let's see. I presented this information, by the way, during the summer of 17 to a meeting of representatives of the city, University Village, and the Albany Unified School District, and told them my formula is we lost 50% of the funding, so we're going to lose 50% of the staffing. We discussed several possible courses of action, but ultimately no practical alternative to the intended staffing reduction was realized due to the tightening budgets of the other entities involved. And neither would kick down any money for the program to continue the way that it was. As a result, I came up with the kind of a stopgap, or what I call the pilot program, to just get it through the school year for last year, and actually through where we are today, and brought that to council. And this was in, I think, the end of July. I had gone to council last year, so they could get the information on the proposed changes to the program and provide direction or commentary to staff regarding those changes. And I told them at that time, if funding was restored at or near previous levels, an alternative action, we could find something else to do other than cut half of the staff. At that meeting, July 31st of last year, City Council authorized interim city funding necessary to fully fund the program through the end of the calendar year 2017. So that would get us from September through the holiday period last year. And directed staff to explore funding possibilities with UC and the Albany Unified School District again to address the revenue loss before making any permanent changes to the program. So we had a few months to work on it. We were ultimately able to secure a one-time commitment from both UC and the school district to contribute supplemental funds to the city's expenses necessary to keep the program running at full staffing through the end of the year. the calendar year. I'm sorry, through the end of the school year. So working with UC and the school district, they were able to give us some money to make sure we could staff 6 guards for the remainder of the school year that we are in right now. However, each of those agencies stress that this funding commitment will terminate at the end of the current school year. I thought I had that note, June 15th of this year, at which time neither of them will contribute any additional funds to continue the program. Due to UC's withdrawal of funding and Albany Unified School District's refusal to contribute to the program costs, what I last told City Council was that this situation will necessitate either increased city contributions moving forward or reduced program staffing levels. And of course, the members of the City Council have expressed great interest in gathering more data and information, as well as some interest in exploring a warrant method for determining where crossing guards should be posted, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I told the council that I would try to gather some more information and perhaps have that brought before this body, the Traffic and Safety Commission, for some comments before I bring it back to the City Council. So the police department finds that we are approaching the end of the school year and our partners in the school district and UC have abandoned us on this issue. Because we haven't had the time or resources to perform a thorough analysis of our options, I'm preparing to recommend to the City Council that they authorize fully funding the crossing guard program through the next school year to give us some time to prepare some alternatives for consideration. As I said, my original intent in coming before the Commission tonight had been to receive some feedback primarily on crossing guard warrants and some sort of process, since this body is familiar with the warrant process, that concept. However, as my thoughts on the issue have kind of matured, I felt it would be a good idea to broadly discuss a few of the concepts under consideration for when I do go back before the City Council on May 21st. So I'm not here before your commission tonight with a resolution or anything formal to adopt. I want to be able to get your input and use it in preparation for my next discussion before the City Council. So before I talk about a few of the items on my draft list, I thought it might be informative to take a look at what some other jurisdictions do with the intent of kind of shaking our paradigm here of thinking that this is a police department program that's fully funded by the city. So there are examples of other cities where they split the cost 50-50 between police department and school district. There are some that fully fund the program, school district, some where the school district fully funds and administers the program. There are other hybrid versions of that as well, and I think there's at least 1 or 2 local examples I could point out if there's interest in that. Pacifica, Belmont, Brentwood, Ceres, Union City, Foster City. So those are ones where the program is run by the school district. There are contracting, and I'm actually going to talk about that in a minute as well. Some of them contract out the service with an outside vendor to perform and manage that. And like I said, I'll expand on that in a minute. And again, there are other hybrid versions that involve different configurations. There are different departments in the city that run programs as opposed to the police department. And as I'm hearing myself talk, it sounds like I'm trying to get rid of it, trying to make it run better, and at the same time make my department run better. And I just need to find out how to get what that looks like. And because what we're doing right now does not work as good as it should for safety. Let's see. So getting into warrants. For several years, I've been wanting to initiate a warrant process that more closely follows the standards that are found in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD. And a warrant, loosely described, a warrant describes a threshold condition that can be used in conjunction with other traffic conditions or factors to determine whether a traffic control device or other improvement is justified. And so in the past, we've developed where crossing guards go. It's a legacy program that I inherited many years ago. And sometimes government isn't really good at kind of rethinking what they're doing or stopping what they're doing and moving on to a better way of doing it. And I think the warrant process might help provide a little clarity on where crossing guards are needed. Of course, developed in coordination with the school district and their unique population, their community, which is what we've done in the past, but without any kind of a warrant process. And so it tends to be a little bit more of a visceral decision-making process. So warrants would be one of the things that I intend to discuss with City Council. Contracted services. So I'd previously made an inquiry to a crossing guard provider, private company, and it was expensive. So they were asking for about, from what I can recall, about 80% more of what our budgeted monies were for the program. So it was a significant increase, but they were also providing a significant wage increase that went along with that. So it was, in some cases, it would have been a doubling of their wages, which is beneficial to the employee, provides a more livable living wage, I guess you would say. Our crossing guards right now make, according to my notes, between $12.71 an hour and $15.46 an hour. So, and with contracting, there are other benefits that are kind of not seen. The analogy that, as it was explained to me, is it's kind of like an iceberg. You kind of see the top, and you can see wages. Okay, it costs X amount of dollars to employ 6 crossing guards for 180 days a year. So we see wages, equipment, and supervision are kind of above the waterline, and then the rest of the iceberg that really doesn't always factor into the decisions are things like workers' comp claims, the backfilling of vacancies and other inefficiencies when we do that, the cost of accidents when they do occur, the administrative costs, the record keeping, the HR function, background checks, recruiting, employment type stuff, hiring, training, problem resolution, which is another thing that comes up from time to time when you're administering the program. And there's a lot of benefits. There's, they're well insured and whatnot, and they provide ongoing training and a lot of other things. A lot of reason that really needs to be revisited because it may cost more, but a cursory look at it makes me believe that it may be a better way of doing it. It's not in my notes. I'll throw out there. There has been comment, I think at least some public comment about possibly looking at some of the soda tax revenue to help offset expenses for this program. I don't know where that stands right now, but that's something that I've heard that is out there. And I don't know if that would factor into a decision to employ a contractor that would cost more, but that's also something that may come up in that May 21st discussion with City Council. And make sure I've covered everything I wanted to cover. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we really haven't had the time or the resource to really fully explore all of, do any kind of an analysis of all the options that might be out there for making the program better and meeting the needs of the children and their families. So I plan to recommend that City Council keep that full funding while we explore the possibility of conducting a more fuller assessment of exactly what those needs might be. And for that, I was going to defer to Jeff to talk maybe a little bit about this concept of the school safety assessment.
Yes, one of the things that went into our general plan, which was approved in 2015, was to look at our school, as part of the transportation element of the general plan, to look at our schools and consider school safety, both safe routes to schools for pedestrians and bicyclists, as well as pickup and drop-off, motor vehicle pickup and drop-off. And we're beginning to think that with all the changes that are going on with the schools, the rehabilitation or expansion of schools in the next few years, this would be a good time in the next year or so to begin an assessment of where the risks are, the greatest risks are, and prioritize where there are hazards to the youngsters and to adults as well, for that matter, and then come up with some priority projects that will address those risks. And part of this can certainly include crossing guards as where we want to put our money into improving the safety for the kids.
So I'm very supportive of that idea. What I find is that sometimes we in the police department get tasked with doing things that are a little bit outside our wheelhouse. So, determining the safe route to get to the school or the best, that is, we kind of do that from kind of a common sense and an experiential point of view, but often there are people that are much more skilled at that sort of thing that we need to defer to. Likewise, trying to gather some data on school crossings is problematic for us. I've had a couple of interns out trying to do it, and our analysis is pretty straightforward. It's counting people as opposed to counting people and cars and right turns and straight throughs and all that other stuff, and doing a more comprehensive look at what's happening at any given intersection. So I wasn't really happy with the 2 weeks of data that we got. I really didn't get any information out of that data. I fully support doing something that's more comprehensive than us kind of doing it the way we always have. And with that, I'm basically done with my prepared comments with regard to crossing guards, but I'm here and happy to answer any questions.
Can you talk about the annual cost for the program? I know you mentioned the hourly rates of the staff of the crossing guards themselves, but what's the overall program costs for the city?
Great question. Let me pull that up. I want to make sure I give you the right numbers. It should be here. I apologize. I anticipated getting asked that tonight. Okay. So for the school year that just ended last June, or the fiscal year, our crossing guard program costs approximately $73,000 a year. And we were getting a little over $38,000 from UC at that time. I have the exact number here if you prefer it. I can get into the dollars and cents.
No, I think
Okay.
that's good, for me at least.
Does that reflect what you mentioned before with the fill-in, last-minute fill-in by your staff of
No.
absences or whatever?
It
So
doesn't.
It's not a fully loaded,
Yeah, no, it's not.
this is just what's
That's-
paid to the,
That number represents the line item in our budget for paying the salaries.
Salaries, okay.
For the salaries and benefits, I think.
okay.
We have
So it
some,
doesn't include any of the management either, then?
nothing, no. That's that bottom part of the iceberg that we typically don't account for when we think about the program costs.
So when you say you're asking the city council to fund the program for the next year, are you asking them just to fund the $73,000 for the personnel costs, or are you asking the city to devote more
Personnel.
resources than that? Okay.
We'll stick with the same convention that we've been using, and it'll probably be a little bit more to that due to pay raises and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the soda tax. Jeff, can you talk about, so there was an item that came to us about or a question that asked us to start thinking about, are there programs or projects that we want to fund with extra revenue from the soda tax? So what's the status of that?
I'm not the primary staff person involved with that, so I'm not comfortable giving you, I know there was a report to the city council. I don't know that any final decisions have been made for the next fiscal year about the expenditure of those funds. I can get that information back to you for your next meeting, and probably will come up when this comes to the city council, I would imagine, as well.
There was a working kind of idea of how much that would be? Yeah, okay.
There is, and I don't remember it, I'm sorry. during public comment, perhaps I'll do a little sleuthing and see if I can get answers to those questions when it comes back to your discussion.
Any others, Robert?
That's all my questions.
So the history, just a little bit more from UC, so they've just stopped funding. Was there any background to the reasoning or?
Budget shortfall, I can't remember the exact verbiage that they shared with me. Yeah, they were looking at a rather large, I think, a budget deficit system-wide, and they just said, we can't afford to do that anymore.
But they've provided those services for Ocean View for many years.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm wondering if some of the challenges of running this program and some of the perceived benefits of outsourcing it to a contractor come from the small size of the city, and whether banding together with other small cities in the region would create a better economy of scale, allow like some of the personnel and below the iceberg issues to be centralized in a way that would end up costing less overall than having each little department do it themselves. Is that something you've considered?
I think that sounds right. I think if you're contracting the service and you employ people to do that, you kind of get those economies of scale. As you know, a region has that service. If you need to fill a vacancy, you've got a deeper pool or a bigger bench than I have to fill those vacancies. And yeah.
So has the city considered kind of a collaboration among regional cities to keep it in the public sector as an alternative to contracting it out to a private company?
No, not that I'm aware of. And I would tend to think that there wouldn't be much interest in that. It's worth checking, but I think, I don't know that anyone else would want to do that.
Is that because the other small cities don't have crossing guards, or they don't have the same kind of problem then?
I'd have to look and see what our neighboring jurisdictions have. I know that they have some, but I'm not even sure what their model is, if they're employed or if they're contracted. I think Kensington has one that I think is contracted. I'm not quite sure what Berkeley is doing, or El Cerrito. They may be on my list and I didn't see it, but I don't know if that would, someone still has to administer it, do the hiring and all of that stuff that kind of comes with employing people. And I think I see more and more municipalities outsourcing this service.
Okay.
So while I tend to think I'd be more comfortable with fully trained crossing guards, did any of the cities that you looked at have a volunteer-based program as their baseline, not just as their backfill?
Yes, let me give you an example. Reading, which is considerably larger than us, has, well, it says in the comments here from my staff member, it says no program, teachers and staff are in charge of doing it. Selma, California, these are all California agencies. Parents Club volunteers. Tiburon, run through the school district, maybe a hybrid of parent volunteers and possibly some paid, according to my notes. Those are some examples I have here.
Okay.
And this is according to research that was done last summer.
Right.
Well, research is probably a pretty heavy word for that, but a poll, survey.
Okay. Most of my questions were answered. You breezed pretty quickly, I think, over warrants. Just to be, could you flesh that out a little bit?
Sure. So I referenced the MUTCD, which you're probably all familiar with.
Could you spell that out for the audience?
The MUTCD is and I did not bring the one that says, tell me if I say it wrong, it's the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So when we want to put up a stop sign we go to the MUTCD and it tells you how big a stop sign should be and what it looks like and the size of the lettering and whatnot. And it covers all things traffic control, I guess you would say. And so Chapter 7D in the MUTCD references crossing supervision. And in there, they have language for criteria for adult crossing guards. And I don't think they use the word warrant, but basically they describe situations where adult crossing guards may be used under the following conditions. And then it gives specifics. So, for example, at a stop sign controlled intersection, Buchanan and Jackson would be an example of that. It says where the vehicular traffic volumes on undivided highways of four or more lanes, sorry. At traffic signal controlled intersections, it talks about the number of vehicular turning movements through the school crosswalk that exceeds a certain amount per hour. It's that kind of data-driven look at what warrants having someone there. And one of the discussions I've had with my staff, getting off from your question a little bit, is how are we affecting the workings of an intersection? So Ocean View, for example, when we interject, the human being into there that prohibits the right turn and does other things that have been kind of engineered and they're light controlled and whatnot. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have someone there, but we also shouldn't willy-nilly just say, let's put somebody there without really studying the need for that and whether or not that increases the risk. The accidents that I'm aware of over the last, decade or so that happened in our crossing guard crossings, we've, I think, had more at the ones that had lights that were signal controlled intersections. But that would be research to look that up. That'd be going back and finding that. But I'm anecdotally over my 30 years here, I think that's the way it has played out. And so there's that conversation about whether or not an engineered signal-controlled intersection, what's the benefit versus teaching children, watch out for those cars because they're often not being driven responsibly. So the warrant, to expand on that further, MUTCD has some stuff in there. There are also examples from other cities that use them. Fremont uses a warrant process that was adopted through, I think, a city council resolution that specifically spelled it out and said this is what warrants crossing guard. City of Santa Clarita in Southern California has a pretty extensive way they decide. It's all spelled out actually online, how they decide where where a crossing guard is going to be placed and how you get there. So someone makes a request, a study is done, and then if it warrants having a guard there, then the school district is told how much it will cost to give them a guard, and then the school district can make that decision whether or not they want to have a crossing guard. There's some other local examples. I don't know if I brought those with me or not, but
I think you've gone far enough for me.
Okay, great. I could talk all night if you let me.
I'm sure you could. And just going back to something you said before about teaching versus having a crossing guard, I'm sure you agree that you could do both. Teach kids to avoid the cars and have a crossing guard.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I didn't think that you meant you couldn't.
No.
I just wanted to be clear about that.
I'm sorry if you heard it that way. That's
No, I didn't hear
not the way I meant it.
It could be taken that way, I think,
No,
but that's not the way I took it.
They do a great job and a great role model and whatnot, but we're out of money.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the point, I think, where we turn it back, unless there are any further questions from the commission or comments from staff. Jeff? Right. We're going to open this up for public comment. And as the chief mentioned, our goal tonight is sort of air this issue. I think I can speak for everybody here on the commission that we all really care about the safety of our kids in this city. And I don't think that's really the issue. The issue is how to go about best protecting them and using the resources that we have. So we're looking for constructive comments and all of your comments, but certainly constructive comments to pass on to City Council in terms of what we can do in this time of somewhat limited resources. How many people are here to talk about this issue this evening? Can I see hands? Okay. Right. And we're going to have you up to the podium in a minute. I've got cards that people have handed in. I'm going to call off names. I'm going to stick with the 3 minutes, but I'm going to suggest that if you are reiterating something that somebody else has said, please feel free to refer to that and move on and talk about what you uniquely are going to say tonight in order to keep the night moving along. And I'll just remind you in terms of the way this works, really you're speaking to the commission. It's a public meeting. If you could hold your applause for maybe afterwards outside, that would be appreciated and will help us keep the meeting going on. If you agree with something great, we'd love you to say that when you're at the podium. And we thank you for that. So let me call the first 3 names. We're going to start with Sue Douglas, Sarah Palmer DeFrank, and Megan Gadsby, who is also on here with Barry Kwan. You would each get 3 minutes. So, and if you could line up over here, that'd be great. So that was Sue, Sarah, and Megan Gadsby plus.
I'm Sue Douglas.
Very cool.
I've already spoken. I'm going to wait my opportunity.
Thank you very much. That'll keep us moving. Great.
Hello. Thank you, Commission, for listening to us tonight, and thank you, Chief, for the historical context. My name is Sarah Palmer DeFrank. I'm a resident of Albany. I live at 1077 Peralta. Before that, I lived at 188 Key Route. My children both went to, and currently do go to, Ocean View. As you can imagine, living in the southeast section of Albany, that bike ride and walk for them is quite challenging. So I have a few things to say. One is I think it's wonderful that the UC contributed money. I don't see that it's their responsibility. I don't think that the children that go to Ocean View who live in University Village often even use a crossing guard. So I do feel that it's up to us to figure out what the solution is. Having said that, there's kind of an optics issue, and I'm going to say that because I know that it's probably not the whole truth and everything that's going on, but as a resident who drives down Peralta and then down Marin, I see 2 crossing guards at Marin Elementary School with a really nice signal that says no right turn on red, with 2 crossing guards flanking that really nice sign. I don't see that at any of the other schools. So I think, if anything, there should be some parity there. The other issue is that children are literally playing leapfrog to get across San Pablo. And I don't think we need a warrant for that. I think we just need to take a look. I mean, it's pretty hairy. So thank you for taking up this issue, and I'm sure everyone else in the audience has a lot to say. I won't take up your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Gadsby, and I'm an Albany resident. I live on Madison Street, and I have a kindergartner and a 3rd grader, Devin. This is my son, Devin. I came to speak because my son and his friend have formed a walking school bus, so they're actually in 3rd grade, and they're now gaining some independence and wanting to walk on their own to Ocean View School. And one of the things that I've noticed at the intersection of Solano and Jackson, where it's a 4-way stop, the crossing guard that was posted there retired, I think at the end of the calendar year, so we don't have a crossing guard there now. But our kids are at a height where drivers don't always see them. So they're walking in a little pack on their own, and I'm usually a block behind with my kindergartner, but that intersection where there's no crossing guard right now is pretty hairy. I was driving last week and I saw a bicycle almost get hit by a car there. You know, people get confused on whose turn it is to go. So I'd like to just appeal to you to put a crossing guard back in that position. I think we have funding through the end of this year, so maybe that's going to be saved and rolled over to next year, because there's only 5 guards right now out of the 6 funded positions. And then this is my neighbor and her son, so she's going to.
So I'm Barry Kwan, and this is Lucas, and
it's very neat because we do live so close together, and this walking school bus idea is a really wonderful idea that we want to try to incorporate with more kids. I think it's really great when we say we want to walk and roll to school, but if it's unsafe, we're not going to have our kids walk and roll to school. So without the crossing guard at Solano and Jackson, it's been tough, and the cars that go through that instead of using San Pablo in the bigger intersections, a lot of them aren't locals, so they're using Waze and they're using Google Maps, and they don't know this, and so they just kind of tap and go. And the kids are small enough that they don't always see them, so it's really important that we try to get those intersections covered and make sure that the kids stay safe and that they are encouraged to walk.
And I just wanted to make a final comment. This is about the other intersection near our school, which is Buchanan and Jackson. We have Doug there. He is wonderful. Would definitely like to keep him there. He does educate the kids. He constantly yells, "Stay back!" And he basically teaches them about safety. But without him there, I think the kids would probably just be up by the curb. And he's like, "Cars sometimes drive over this curb. You need to be back behind the pole." Yeah. So he's just a great resource. So if we can continue having him. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a special request from Kim Trutang, who's apparently needs to refer to a file and her phone is running out of battery. So with the indulgence of, or her computer is running out of battery.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Safety and Traffic Commission, for having this. And I also want to thank Chief McQuiston for that great presentation and for bringing forward the proposal to maintain 6 guards next year to the City Council. I think that of course, we all want our kids to stay safe, and I also want our kids to walk to school. I think it's good for them, and I think it's good for the environment, and if we can make that journey safe so that more parents feel comfortable allowing their kids to do that, it would be a benefit for the city. I just have a couple of points that I wanted to bring up. One of them is historical trivia. Albany had a large and active junior traffic police force that, so we had 5th graders that served as crossing guards in the 1940s and early 1950s. And then that was eliminated when I think cars got bigger and faster and there got to be a whole lot more traffic. So I'm on the school board also, and I just wanted to remind everyone that the school district has had costs passed on to it by the state, and we are facing $2 million of cuts. Not this coming school year, but we're having to plan for that for the following school year, which out of a $45 million budget is huge, and that's not going to be easy to do. And I think that the school district would love to have enough cash to be able to help with this. But instead, we're going to have to be looking very carefully at our staffing levels, and if we indeed have to make $2 million worth of cuts, if no new revenue is found, then we're going to have to consider reducing staff. Okay, so that's one bit of information. When I was looking at the crossing guard situation last summer, I started calling around and emailing different cities in Alameda County. This is only Alameda, not Contra Costa. But I found that the city and the school district share cost in the city of Alameda, in Emeryville, Fremont, and Piedmont. There is only one city in Alameda County, Union City, where the school district pays fully for the crossing guard. And it's city-only funded in Pleasanton, Newark, Livermore, and Berkeley. I'm going to include Dublin in that because in Dublin they have 12 guards. 11 are city and 1 is district. And my last note is that a number of these cities in Alameda County use all city management which to outsource. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, three are Suzanne Zalev, Rachel Sarah, and Ariel Lustig.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for getting my last name right. Nobody ever gets it right.
It's a fluke. Sorry.
I just wanted to encourage you to recommend fully funding the 6 crossing guards next year. And in particular, I live on Jackson, a half a block from Solano. That intersection is really dangerous. I see near misses there all the time. We haven't had our crossing guard there regularly since last year. After last year, Beverly, our crossing guard at Jackson and Solano, got moved to one of the Cornell intersections. We had a temporary replacement who retired, and then when I asked about it, I was told that the reason Ocean View only had 1 crossing guard was because ours had retired, but that's not entirely true. Ours got moved to a different intersection, and when I drive to work every day, I drive by her on Marin, and then I drive by Marin School where they have 2 crossing guards at one intersection that has a light that they don't look very busy, the 2 crossing guards, and I wonder why Marin gets 2 at one intersection and we don't even get one of ours covered. And that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Sarah. I'm the mother of 2 daughters and a homeowner in Albany. My children attend 2 different public schools here, so I know how vital the crossing guards are to their safety, and I will do my best to say something that adds to the discussion. So my youngest is a kindergartner at Ocean View, and every morning we cross both Solano and Buchanan and walk back the same way every afternoon. I have a high schooler who crosses at San Pablo at the light every morning and afternoon too, with often with the daughter of one of the commissioners here. And I've personally experienced many times how dangerous that intersection is at Buchanan without crossing guards, as others have already stated, because there is no crossing guard at that corner right now. I can't tell you how often people are texting while driving, talking on their phone while driving. At least once a week, I have to put up my hand to stop a car from rolling through one of the stop signs. I am also volunteer with the Walk and Roll program. Every month walking to encourage kindergartners to walk and roll to school. So I'm very passionate about encouraging this and see not only for the environment, but also how much cars pile up in front of Ocean View. So I'm asking you also to please fund the program. I really appreciate the police commissioner's openness to find more creative ways to protect our children. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi.
Before you start, the next 3 will be Nadia Targulian, Ben Hensler, and Brian Parsley.
Okay, thanks. I'm still Ariel Lustig. I live on Jackson Street between Solano and Washington. So my 4th grader walks through both the Jackson and Solano intersection and the Buchanan one. I also have an incoming kindergarten next year, so we'll have many years of that commute, or whichever commute we're going to have when all the construction happens. Most people have already said my thoughts about the need, and I thank you so much for all of your background history. I just wanted to bring up, as you're looking into the needability, or whatever the word is, for the research that goes into, well, which place do we have the crossing guard? I don't know, and it's just a question to not answer here, but how do you factor in all the near misses I've seen over the last, however, 5 or 6 years with from kindergarten to now 4th grade, and then like Doug is at the corner. There's so many times, it's not just about learning, because people just bang that right all the time. People are always rolling through, so it's not, so we all know that's happening, and I guess my question is just how are you going to measure that? Because you can measure how many turns, but it's also the human behavior of angry commuters trying to get to work, and just bringing that up for consideration when you do your research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nadia Targulian, and I live in the Albany Hill neighborhood. And I also would like to ask for the funding to be reinstated for the Buchanan-Jackson intersection. I think I know many people who live in Albany Hill neighborhood who actually go both to Cornell and Ocean View and use this intersection all the time. And as for many of the people who actually use it, this is one of the intersections that's you know, how you get to Buchanan and go to the highway, so people actually are ready to drive to work, so they want to get there. And in the same time, we have all these little ones just dribbling to Ocean View and to Cornell, so it's really kind of nerve-wracking to watch it, because I usually try to either walk with them or I have to drive them sometimes if I don't have time. But so one other last quick thing is, I think it's a big decision when you allow your kids to start walking themselves. I have two children, one kindergartner and one, she's actually going to middle school, also use this intersection all the time. So it's actually for middle schoolers as well. So it's a decision for us to whether we allow our kids to be independent and walk themselves. If there's no crossing guard, I would think really twice before I allow them to do it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ben Hensler. I'm a parent of a second grader at Ocean View School and a middle schooler at Albany Middle School. I also live on Solano Avenue, right at the corner of Jackson. So I look out my front window and I can see the conditions there at that intersection without the crossing guard all hours of day, when there should be a crossing guard, when there used to be one there, and on other hours at the same time. And the situation has progressively deteriorated since the crossing guard who was there retired in December. When we lost that crossing guard, for a while, the police department had put up a sign, at least notifying people, warning people there was no guard. Now there's no sign, there's no guard, and it may be the procedure in other cases, but I've never seen a police officer fill in under any circumstances there since December to make up for the lack of the guard. It's a very dangerous intersection because it's used as a thoroughfare, as people have said, for accessing the interstate by drivers, many of whom are coming from other jurisdictions like El Cerrito, and who don't actually have any awareness of this as an area that's used by school kids. And so it makes it very dangerous. As other people have said, there's lots of rolling stops. The guards there are not really modifying the physical controls. They're not trying to do something on top of what the stop signs and stoplights are supposed to do. They're actually the ones who are they're the only ones actually making sure that anyone is obeying the law in the first place. And I do see police there actually ticket at other hours of the day, except for school hours, because people are violating the same, they're running the same stop sign at other times. At the school hours, without the guards, the conditions are a lot worse. You know, I understand the financial constraints. I wish if we were in a time, back when, we were kids, when you could have volunteers acting as crossing guards. I had friends who were crossing guards for their schools when I was growing up. I don't really think that's practical anymore. These other jurisdictions that may have parent volunteers are probably not in areas where the school is being used as a thoroughfare to access the interstate. Our PTA, I'm on the board of PTA, it's not insured to cover parents volunteering as crossing guards. In fact, our former PTA president's son was hit at this intersection 2 or 3 years ago. When no guard was present, it was right after the time when the guards leave, back when we had a guard. I don't think we should wait for a worse accident to happen before restoring the guard. I think we need to have a guard back there now. Thank you.
Thank you. So Brian's going to speak, and then Maya Watts. And if anybody else wants to submit a comment card, please do.
Good evening, Commissioners. Brian Parsley, Albany resident, and for transparency purposes, I am a 26-year member of the University of California Police Department, 12 of which I served in Albany Village. I think ideally you would have 6 guards. I think the chief actually brought up a great idea in outsourcing. I think that's probably one of the most effective ways you're going to find it. I think if you listened to him, you heard the struggle of managing a program with the way it is now. Obviously, the cost is prohibitive, but I think with if this is a serious community issue, the citizens wouldn't mind placing a tax upon themselves to pay for that. The reality is the schools are dangerous, yes. The number one, unfortunately, and this is going to be unpopular, but I'm here to tell you the number one cause of that is the parents. The parents are the number one cause of dangerous driving around schools. I know because I've seen it for 12 years. I've seen parents come across the double yellow line to park the wrong way to pick up their kids. I've seen parents more than willing to block up an entire intersection just to wait for their kids rather than to have to park on Buchanan and walk 10 feet. I've seen parents do a 17-point turn to try to find the one parking spot on the opposite side of Jackson Street. It is not this mysterious cabal of reckless drivers. It's Albany residents that are the cause. So and it's not just commuters. It's not just Ocean View. I believe you and I saw one day when Marin was backed up, a driver crossed the double yellow line and drive probably about 150 or 200 yards in the opposite lane. So it is people who are irresponsible drivers. I think the only effective way is to outsource this like other cities. It's going to cost money. It's not going to come from soda tax, because at the meeting where the community got together and placed their little Post-it notes on where they want, crossing guards was on there, and there was one Post-it note. So the council doesn't have the wherewithal probably to fund that with soda tax money. It can only come through a tax upon the citizens, and that's how we will determine how serious this is. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maya Watts. I live on Jackson Street. I have a first grader who goes to Ocean View and a rising kindergartner next year. I think this is, it's obvious that the Albany schools are a draw for residents who are looking to buy in the neighborhood. You know, it's not just the quality of the schools, but also the community and the environment, and so I think it's something that's really important to preserve. This intersection at Buchanan at Solano, you have cars that are coming down the hill. They're racing, they're not stopping at that intersection, they're rolling through. The other ones that are going up Jackson, they see the light is green and they are speeding through that intersection to catch that green light. The other issue on Buchanan, as others have mentioned, you know, we love Doug, he's fantastic. People are gonna blow through and make that right turn so they can get on the highway if we don't have a crossing guard there. So we really, really need those 2 guards. I think it was incredibly frustrating when we didn't know whether the guard would be there or not. It's very difficult to send your child to school to walk when you have a sign posted. There may be a guard here, there may not be. It's very frustrating. And finally, just as I think Sarah mentioned, the optics, it's not the first time that we've seen a disparity in the way Ocean View has been treated compared to the other 2 schools. The diversity at Ocean View was a draw for us. It was our first choice. I think it's an incredibly rich community and we really love it. But if you look at the demographics, I think you'll see a very striking difference between Ocean View and Marin and Cornell. And I think it's important to make sure that there's equity in the way that all 3 of those schools are treated.
Thank you. Dale Middleswart. Pardon me if I got that wrong.
Great job with the name, thank you. Dale Middle School, I live on 715 Madison Street. I've had a 20-year-old, this is my second daughter I'm raising here, who's also going to Ocean View. I just wanted to add that whatever surveys you guys do, I think the quality of driving has just gotten atrocious in the last few years with the advent of cell phones. People just, that intersection's way more busy than it used to be. Talk about Jackson and Solano. And we don't have a person there right now, as you know, and I just want to advocate for that because it's very dangerous. And without someone there, it's very clearly that, you might have been able to get away with that years ago, but with the advent of, like I said, phones and more traffic and people bringing their children to the other schools up on top of Jackson, there's just a lot more traffic and a lot more distractions and people are under duress. And so anyway, yeah, if we could get someone back there as quick as possible, I think we'd avoid injury and safer community. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have two additional requests. Sue Douglas decided she would like to speak, so why don't you come on up, and because you haven't had a chance. And Ben Hensler asked to speak specifically on outsourcing of guards. I'm gonna put you off on that. You had a chance to speak. We're not going to be making any decisions on outsourcing tonight. Why don't you go ahead and put your thoughts in a letter, and you can address that to us and to the chief. I think that would be the most effective way to deal with that. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank you too for your presentation, and I would suggest, Chief McQuiston, that when you do your assessment, that you poll the parents at Cornell to find out who drives their children because they don't feel it is safe for them to cross Marin or Solano. Remember, that is the only one of the three schools that has no controlled intersections. There are,
Directly adjacent to the school.
What?
Directly adjacent to the
Well,
school.
that cross Marin. There's no control. There are no lights unless you go 3 blocks that way, or 3 blocks that way.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who live directly across, they shouldn't have to do that. My second comment, I'm a little puzzled by Marin because it was my understanding that the two crossing guards, one would be at Marin and the other would be at Solano, because there are kids coming from that go through that intersection. And true, there's a traffic signal there, but I don't understand why two are hanging out in one intersection. And I just want people to keep in, to make sure that, because I live right across from Cornell School and I see many accidents waiting to happen as people are trying to get their kids to school, exercising their right to drive their kids to the schoolhouse door, is what I've always said. And it's very, very dangerous. So it could be alleviated if people felt their kids were safe to walk through an intersection that had controlled access. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have one more here from Rachel Anderson.
Sorry about that. I thought I
It's
had
okay.
one more person to make my way over here. Thank you all for entertaining this issue this evening. As you can tell, it's quite important to those of us who send our children to Ocean View School. I am Rachel Anderson. I live at 1505 Beverly Place, so just like Sarah, on the opposite end of the district, sending my children, who are a third grader and a kindergartner this year, to school on their own at this point is not a viable option, but my third grader is advocating that one day he will be able to. And so I am looking to ask all of you in this season of change within our district, as well as within our city, that you spend some time really digging into this issue when we talk about outsourcing of guards, to make sure that these are people who are going to show up, that they have a link to our community. When we talk about someone like Doug, who is there every day, regardless of the cold and wet weather, he shows up. And looking at how those intersections, whether it's the one on Solano and Jackson, where there currently is not a crossing guard, but also looking across from where Doug is usually posted there at Jackson and Buchanan as well. My child has nearly been hit at least 3 times, and I am there with him by people who are attempting to make that right turn onto Jackson to avoid the San Pablo light and the construction to be able to zip through the UC Village. All of that is to say, when we talk about a warrant, what warrants posting a guard at any particular intersection, it seems to me when we're talking about whether or not to fund 6 guards, in my mind as a parent, I'd love to see more than 6. To me, there are quite a few more options or intersections where a guard would be warranted, in my estimation, and I would ask that the council spend some time really investigating the district as a whole when we're talking about safe routes to school and talking about who is going to be those people, boots on the ground every day to ensure that our kiddos are seen and protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Chief, would you like to get up for a second and address some of the concerns?
Sure. I just made a couple of notes while I was listening to everyone. I think for the first time in my public service career, I think I agree with absolutely everything that was said by everyone. But I'll have to go back over my notes. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I was not clear on or did not talk about earlier, and address just a few things here. First of all, I always tell the story that my own daughter, when she went to Cornell School, had a very close relationship with her crossing guard, and that was her crossing guard. And I completely get that when I hear the public talk about the relationships that the students and the parents can develop with these guards. I've been there myself. In talking about contracting out the service, I just want to mention once again that there's a labor union that represents that group, and that's not the sort of thing that we can just kind of write a check and it's done. There's a lot more work involved there because they're represented employees, and lots of discussion needs to be had around that. But I would say that I would, if we ever have those discussions, I think one of my requisites for contracting is making sure that our employees have an opportunity to get those jobs. You know, that's not, this is not outsourcing in the traditional sense where, you know, people get laid off or anything like that, at least not in my view. The question of the optics and the different demographics at the schools, I'm aware of that. And that's why, when faced with this decision originally, I've long been aware of that issue. And that's why when we devised the plan to deal with losing 3, I made sure each school had 1 for that reason. And I wanted to give a little insight into why I decided Solano and Jackson would be uncovered, which, by the way, we've posted for that job in November, and I don't think we've had any interest at all in it. It's been posted, I think it was the end of November when we posted for that vacancy in anticipation of a retirement. So if anyone wants a job and can hear me, we're hiring for that position. We're fully funded through the end of this year, and as I said, I anticipate full funding for next year as well. So that factors into why you hear members of the public saying there's no guard there, right? And so that's the decision making that went into that. And with regard to that particular intersection, you know, we had a tough choice to make here. We have 6 intersections covered, and we have 5 guards, and so it falls on me ultimately as the department head to decide where that guard's not going to be. And I decided that it would be that intersection. That's me in consultation with my staff. We had to pick one. It was that one. It's a 4-way controlled. I do agree with some of the comments that have been said about the driving behaviors there. But we have, as someone pointed out with Cornell, we have no controls, and we're trying to get kids across Marin, Solano. The risks are, you know, it's a tough thing. We had to make that call, and I'll take the heat on that. That was my call, that it would be that intersection. Let's see. I think those are the things that I wanted to make sure I pointed out and made sure that everybody knew what that was about, so.
I see a hand, maybe I can ask your question. I think you misstated there. You said we were covering 6 intersections.
I'm sorry, 5 intersections with 6 guards.
There you go. Was that your comment?
No, well, my question was, why does Marin have 2 at one intersection? Why not cover 5 intersections with 5 guards and have each one only have 1 guard?
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to repeat your question so we can get it on the record. And in general, we do want to have you wait and come up to the microphone before making comments. But so the question was, along the same lines, why 6 guards at 5 intersections?
Yeah, so with regard to that intersection, there have been 2 guards there historically for as long as I think I've worked here. I think since the around 1980. Larger intersection, a little busier. I don't know if the traffic numbers with the changes in driving and patterns and whatnot over the last few years, I don't know if those numbers are still valid or not, but it's a big intersection for the guards to get from one side to the other, and we have a stop sign controlled intersection that is generally it's more of a feeder as opposed to an arterial, and we're dealing with Santa Fe and Marin there, 2 big streets with a lot of traffic, and the other intersection is not that big in comparison. I totally get the danger issue. There's not a guard there when there used to be a guard there, but I had to make a decision, and my decision was to keep 2 guards at the larger intersection.
How long was there a guard at Solano and Jackson? I mean, in terms of historic, long time?
Yes, yeah. As long as I can remember, and I've been here since 1988.
Okay.
Any other questions for the chief from the dais?
Did you consider making adjustments to Marin and Santa Fe with the new traffic control devices? Does that change things for you and how you have to manage that intersection?
It did not when we were fully funded and staffed. That was not no. It was I was involved a little bit in giving some feedback as to how that would be redesigned when it was redesigned, and that was not a consideration.
Okay. Maybe I can respond to that. You know, I was involved in the redesigning the intersection through this body, and I was a parent at Marin and a Safe Routes to School volunteer. I would have to say that overall, the danger and the feeling of tension at that intersection was reduced, but it was not eliminated. Yeah. But we should leave off discussion of individual intersections at this point. I think we're talking about funding overall at this point, and I'd like to get responses from the commission to that and whatever else you would like to talk about. So we started at this end last time. Do we have any comments at this end?
Well, I guess I don't have any particular comments about funding. I hope we can work it out. The thing I did want to talk a little bit about was the idea of warrants, and I think people generally hate that word, and for good reason. I've been frustrated by even when I'm on the commission and someone comes up with an idea for adding a stop sign that sounds good to me and staff says, oh, we can't put a stop sign there because it doesn't meet the warrant. There's nothing more frustrating than knowing what you think is a good idea and being told you can't do it because of the warrant. I think the way that we're talking about using warrants here is a little bit different from that, and I would like to try to reassure the community that if we introduce warrants into this discussion, it's going to be in a way that we hope will help the situation and not be used as an obstacle or an obstruction to getting the kind of treatment we want. The idea behind warrants, I think, would be to gather data about the various intersections that are near the schools and prioritize. So we're going to have a certain amount of resources allocated by the city council or a special tax that we vote for, or whatever it is. It's not a bottomless pool. We can't just add a crossing guard at every intersection in the whole city. We have to make decisions about what to do. And when somebody retires and we have a shortage of staff, the chief has already explained how difficult it was to make the decision about which is more important and which is less. And I think that's where we would like to have some kind of more data-driven process, which would involve warrants. So the warrant is not a threshold that says if your street is too quiet, you don't deserve a crossing guard. It's a threshold. I hope it wouldn't even necessarily be a threshold. It would rather be a kind of a ranking that would say, this street is particularly dangerous, this intersection is particularly dangerous, maybe we should try to put 2 guards there. This group of 8 intersections are kind of medium danger, and we should try to staff them when we can, and these other 3 are lower danger, and we should staff them if we can, but if we use up our resources, these are the ones that will go unstaffed. And I think we have to be able to make decisions like that, as the chief has attested, that you don't always have all the resources you need. And so I'm hoping that we can develop a system of warrants and see it as a positive thing for our community, a way of putting the resources we do have to the best use to protect our kids as best we can.
A lot of good input, and I appreciate everyone coming out to talk about this. I do want to say I agree with Brian's comment about, I would say, some of the parents contributing to the bad driving behavior we see out there. 2 reasons I say that. One, on spring break, it feels like the streets are a ghost town. And I'm out there with my kids, and they're like, this is great. There's no traffic. This is wonderful. So that makes me question what the source of all the bad traffic is. The other is when the police department did do an enforcement one day at one of the schools, which I won't name. There was complaints to the school the next day. Why didn't you warn us they were going to be enforcing? From the parents. I would respond, why weren't the parents driving the way they should? There should have been no need for enforcement. But the point is, there are problems out there that we're facing. We want our kids to be comfortable walking and biking. I've got one who's now made it to 9th grade, biking independently for the last 3.5 years, refuses not to walk or bike, even when his bike's in the shop. He insists on walking. He won't let me drive him. If it's raining, he's riding his bike in the rain, which makes me nervous. But point is, everyone's got a different comfort level. Some people are going to drive whether or not it's safe to walk to school. For the ones who want to walk, want to bike, want to get there actively with or without their parents, we want that to be safe. A lot of the distracted driving we see, people using their phone for guidance and finding shortcuts and cutting through town, those are the things that really worry me. The folks wanting to turn right from a stop sign onto Buchanan, for example, busy looking to their left for that gap in traffic when there's a kid coming from the right who can't see them. I've had to tap cars on the hood to say, hey, we're crossing here, look this way before you gun it. These are the things we're all dealing with. I have to say, agreeing with Harry, there's probably no intersection in town that could not be made safer by presence of a crossing guard. We can't put one at every intersection, so we have to prioritize, whether we call it a warrant or a priority criteria, whatever it is. We've got to figure out where to use the resources we've got to get the biggest benefit. One thing for the chief, if we do contract out, and this is maybe a recommendation to council, to put in the contract a preference for local hire, possibly some of our existing staff, would be great. I do strongly support equity between the schools. All of our kids deserve to have equal support getting to and from school. The idea that we have to pay for what we want, if this means a parcel tax or whatever it is, let's put forth the money to get the level of protection for the kids that we want to have. I frankly think that would be well supported in Albany and be successful, and then we'd have some certainty about our staffing. One question that has come up, and I'll kind of approach this in my experience as a traffic engineer, in terms of why a four-way stop might be safer or less in need of a crossing guard than a traffic signal. And I feel like I'm arguing against my own best interest because I live really close to that intersection at Buchanan and Jackson, and my kids go through it frequently, went through it more when they were at Ocean View. But one of the biggest threats based on crash records that I've looked at has tended to be cars that have a green light turning right across a crosswalk where there's a pedestrian. So it's not that someone's jaywalking or someone has a red light, it's both have the green and the car turns without really looking. And without that crossing guard there with the big paddle sign, our kids don't show up as much. So I wasn't there for the discussion, but I see a rationale for why we might want to have 2 crossing guards at a busy signal-controlled intersection. But I think we should definitely develop some criteria that are fact-based around in Albany or in general or whatever it is that we're going to look at, not just the volumes, but what's the risk and what's the potential severity of a crash. Because at least at a four-way stop, unless someone just flat out blows the stop sign at full speed, in which case there's not much you can do about it, they're at least rolling the stop rather than traveling at 25 or 30 before they make their turn. I don't know that that's a primary criteria, but what's the risk level? What's the severity if a crash happens? We know that the risk of fatality between getting hit by a car at 30 versus a car at 20 is doubled. That's a big deal. If you can get it from 20 down to 10 or 15, the survival rate is much higher. I hate even thinking in those terms, but if we're trying to prioritize, we're going to have to take those things into consideration. But then again, for each school, find where the 2, or maybe if we expand the program, 3 most important crossings are to maximize the safety and comfort level for people getting to school. So, lots of comments, but thank you.
At this point, we're not usually engaging in a dialogue. I'm sorry. You have had your chance to speak, and now it's our turn. Thank you.
Talking about the costs, so I was pretty surprised when the cost was only $73,000 annually. So that seemed low to me, and a small amount of money that we can probably figure out between the city, UC, and the school district. But I think one thing for our chief to figure out is all of that overhead costs or the indirect costs. It seems like that's probably a big factor in whether or not you would consider contracting out or keeping the services in-house. And that's everything, right? So that's the overtime costs you have to pay a police officer to cover a shift, all the administrative costs. And I think that will give us a better understanding of what we're dealing with here. But yeah, I hope that between us and the school district and UC, I think between the 3 of us, we have like a $25 million operating budget. I think school district said they have a $45 million operating budget, and who knows, UC has billions of dollars in, I think just at Berkeley alone. So it seems like a $73,000 gap should be something that we can work on to fill. I heard a lot about parents driving, and it seems as part of maybe our Safe Routes to School program that we do some sort of education with parents. I think enforcement's a good thing in doing those impromptu checks to make sure parents are driving correctly around the schools. But if we can do an education campaign around that as well, when you have a parent that's trying to get to work and they're driving, school bell's at 8:30, they're getting there at 8:27. Yeah, they're gonna cut some corners to make that work. And I think that's a regular thing, right, on a daily basis. I think that's all of my comments. Yeah.
We often don't have many people show up to these meetings, so it's very, very nice to see all of you here. This is near and dear to my heart. I want kids walking to school. I want less people driving their kids to school, but they have to be safe doing it, and we're doing a lot of work. Soon, San Pablo will have some treatments that will help get the kids across to high school and middle school from the area that I live. Soon, I always get this wrong. Is it a hawk signal that's going to go in on Buchanan? In the middle, is it hawk?
Yeah, the
Okay.
pedestrian hybrid beacon, the Hawk.
Right. So my child did walk to Ocean View, and it was very scary at the time. At the time, there was only one crossing, which is the one we're talking about at Jackson. Now, at least, there's one on Pierce Street, and I'd be curious to know if that's lessened some of the congestion of the kids at that crossing, because I think that helps too, is not to have all the kids being in one spot. But I think that to get the kids walking, I think, number one, $73,000 isn't what it really takes. It can't be. I think what's happened is the police department's been left holding the bag of what used to be a cobbling together of funds, but administrating the program is really important. And I think this is where community also needs to come in and step up some. And I know we have safe routes to school, but I think there's probably a little bit more that we can do as a community to make this happen. It's astounding that whatever was just said about the tickets given and parents not liking that. It's like I think that some more of that should happen, because that behavior is bad and it happens a lot. So I think not thinking of this as it's always been, and that's what I heard in your presentation. I mean, there have been a lot of changes on Buchanan. There have been a lot of changes on Marin, I think, that have changed the characteristics of a lot of these crossings. So we're using the term warrant, and in our world, often that's very set things in a book. But I think we're trying to kind of bend the terms a little bit and say warrant is really, let's take a fresh look at these risks in these areas and know that we don't have a blank check to have many crossing guards, but I think we need to take a fresher look and make a bigger plan. And I think what I don't want to have happen is we buy another year and not make progress on it. What I don't want to happen also is that the police are left holding the bag. I don't think that's right. I don't think that serves our kids. I think it's a combination of parents and school district and the police. So, and I remember the crossing guard at Buchanan and Jackson being hit. So that has a light there, and I think it didn't only happen once in the time that my daughter went to school at Ocean View, and that's just horrifying to me that there's a light, but everybody's trying to turn right on Buchanan really fast from all of the streets. So.
Yeah. So I agree with all that's been said here, and I think most of what I would say has been said. I definitely agree with parents as a strong component of the traffic and less than great choices that are made, especially during school drop-off. One of the comments that didn't get picked up on was predictability and being able to expect a crossing guard there as part of whether you decide to let your kids walk to school or not. I think that's really important. And I don't know if predictability goes up with outsourcing. If it does, then there's some balance between homegrown, touchy-feely, knowing your crossing guard and absolutely having somebody there. That's something we need to explore. I'm especially concerned because the school drop-off and pickup is going to get a little more exciting over the next few years as the schools go through rebuilding, and even with the current building that's going on, with the addition of the San Gabriel campus at the middle school, we're looking at kids crossing the street on Brighton between periods, throughout the school day. So this is an issue that doesn't just apply to the elementary schools. There's a need to keep kids safe no matter which school they're going to. And I'm sure that's on the minds of all my fellow commissioners. So I just want to get that out in the open. Have you gotten a clear signal from parents and from the commission?
Absolutely. Yes, I have. Can I just say one final thing on this topic, and that is that there was mention of trying to figure out how to get the money from UC and the school district. They're done. They are not at the table. That is not a subject that either of them are willing to discuss.
Okay.
If I may. I'll just kind of restate perhaps in stronger terms. I think scrambling for kind of the spare change in the couch cushions is not the way we want to support our kids' safety. I really would support, a $250,000 a year fund to do this.
Sure.
So, I mean, the deadline for getting something on a November ballot is, I believe, in August. I think staff can look into whether that's feasible. I kind of feel like waiting around for another year, another election is just more wasted time that we're taking risks. If we feel that we want to have it, moving quickly makes sense to me. So,
Okay.
Anyway, just my 2 cents. And maybe more.
I'm not sure practically whether creating a crossing guard tax falls under our work plan.
I don't think it was anything, I'd have to go back and look at it, but I don't recall crossing guards being on your work plan for the year.
Right, so we might need direction from city council on that.
Right, that'd be a recommendation to council, hopefully. In terms of if they want to hear comments from us, we think that would be a good idea. They can direct whoever is the appropriate body to do it. I almost don't feel like it needs to come back to us. If council wants to do it, they can just do it. Formulating the program, maybe, if the police department or whoever gets put in charge of it wants to come back and get our input, we'd be delighted to do that, I suspect, if council so decides and changes our work plan, but that's the next step.
Okay. Other comments? So we aren't actually asked specifically for a recommendation to council, but if you'd like to propose one, I guess now would be the time.
I'd be happy to move that we inform the council that the Transportation Commission recommends or supports the recommendation from the police department for full staffing of the crossing guard program, and that we further recommend that council consider a ballot measure to fund such a program. Potentially $250,000 a year. That's my motion, and I'll clarify. The reason I'm going up to that amount rather than trying to stick at 73,000, I think we heard that contracting out was going to be an 80% increase or so. Functionally, that's 150,000 probably. And we may want to think about expansion or further augmentation of the program, and I don't want us to really have our hands tied as to funding right from the get-go.
I like that, and I'm certainly thinking about the middle school. We don't have to make that specific. Any other comments? Seconding?
Okay.
Yeah.
Far be it from me to be the parliamentarian. I'm not sure, for Brown Act purposes, if this is agendized correctly for anything like that. I'm not sure. I'm no expert on that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a recommended action.
I think at this point, it's as long as you stay focused on the crossing guard issue, I think that would be appropriate. We weren't looking for a recommendation from you, but as long as you stay in the topic area of the agenda item, you can take an action.
Great. Thanks. Okay.
Would it be better to make a motion suggesting that City Council look for a way of guaranteeing future funding? Make it more general instead of talking about a ballot measure and an amount? Is that, if that's equivalent, then...
I think that's equivalent. I think, at this point, it's maybe...
Okay, forget my comment then.
Again, I tried to word it as we suggest that council consider. So we're not directing council. We're just saying these are our thoughts and comments, and we suggest looking into it.
So it's a call to action. It's fairly specific, but they could make a decision to go a different way. I think that's pretty clear. Susan, you've been waiting to...
No, I could back that as a second.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none? Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and we welcome you to stick around for the rest of the meeting.
Really exciting.
For example, do you know how many people, right, you get to hear more from the chief. Do you know how many people have actually been hit in pedestrian bicycling accidents in Albany? We're going to talk about that real soon now. Thanks for sticking around. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to item number 6.2, discussion of trends in traffic violation enforcement and collisions on city streets. And in a moment, we'll have up some graphs.
Excited.
And want to thank the chief for being here tonight to talk about this. We've been on our own looking at data for a while, and hopefully you can help us answer some questions.
So, well, maybe while the chief is getting up, we can just run through this month's numbers. I don't think there's anything that will jump out, will change any of the trends any. As you can see here, one pedestrian collision in March, one bicycle collision in March, continued gradual decline in non-injury accidents, and I'm not even sure there's any statistical significance, but relatively level in the rate of injury accidents, collisions, I should say. And then the continued trend in citations being written. So, like I said, no significant changes for this particular month. And same with DUIs.
Great.
And I apologize. Can I control this from over here if I flip back and forth? Can you hand it off to me? Yeah. Okay, great. Sorry, I know that wasn't what we had talked about.
You want to do it from there?
Can I?
Sure. Or you.
Oh, okay. Well, here we go. Well, I was going to flip back to some of the other ones. Can you go back to say DUI stands for? And I don't have any prepared remarks like I had for my earlier presentation. I just kind of wanted to make myself available to answer any questions you have about the trends that you see here, and share some information with you, some factual, some anecdotal type thoughts that I have on that. The first thing I was going to touch on is the DUI arrests. So you can see here going down. I think it's been about 10 years ago, DUI arrests peaked in California, and they've been kind of going down since then. I don't presume to know why. I haven't read anything yet that has explained why that is. I know that for us locally, we used to be involved up until around right into the beginning of this graph here. We were receiving traffic safety grants, and we were involved in DUI enforcement activity, grant-funded activity to go out and enforce DUI. There can be other events that kind of factor into how these numbers change, and like, can you show the traffic sites? So, traffic citations, if we lose our grant funding for going out and writing lots of tickets. So in particular, a few years ago, we were focusing a lot on distracted driving and people, the handheld devices and that sort of thing. We were writing a fair amount of those. There was a point in time, not covered under this, but from time to time we've had it where we've assigned an officer and said, okay, you're just a traffic officer, just work primarily traffic. And our experience there is that person works traffic and everybody else pulls back because now there's somebody working traffic and they don't, that's that person's job. There are stories across the country that talk about police self-initiated activity, which falls under things like citations, that sometimes it's described as what they call the Ferguson effect. So Ferguson, Missouri, the events there were in August of 2014. And then there were all of the subsequent events that happened in other locations across the country that some people have credited with a pullback on the part of the police. I don't necessarily see that I don't see that in these numbers in Albany. I see the loss of grant-funded traffic enforcement revenue. I see changes in staffing and including some staffing vacancies that will always bring the numbers down if we're busy training someone or if we don't have someone to fill a spot. These things tend to go down. Officers, I think post-Ferguson now have a better appreciation of the disparate impact that their traffic enforcement can have on the economically disadvantaged communities. We certainly are here in Albany, more aware of that now and have had discussions about that sort of thing. So there are, I kind of broadly look at traffic citations as, aside from parking citations, traffic citations, you kind of have the citations for dangerous behaviors like the red light running, stop sign running, speeding, probably the big three. And then you have some that are a little more regulatory or administrative. So, you're supposed to have a light on your license plate. And, that sort of thing, tail light out or issues with headlights. And so we don't have a breakdown of that. That was too much information to try and pull out. That's a big project to pull that out of our system. It doesn't come out very easily. But I think I would be very, very curious if we could ever spend the time to find out, are we still writing the hazardous ones and not so much of the ones that have that really bad impact on some communities? I don't know that, but that's part of a theory here, again, is this increased awareness of that sort of thing among our staff. Let's see. We also don't, I've been the chief for 12 years, coming up in another month or so, and we do not emphasize these numbers. They're not such a large component of performance measurement as they used to be. So we talk about them every month. They're available for everyone to see them. And we have discussions among supervisory staff and whatnot, and we see who's doing what. And this is among other measures that we look at. But it's not, hey, you wrote 1 ticket and you wrote 10 tickets, because then we get into a situation where we're telling an employee, hey, you're not writing as many tickets as this employee. And so if you want to satisfy the boss, you're going to have to go out and write some tickets. And you could probably do that all day long and write legitimate tickets. We just heard from the community about all the bad driving behaviors out there. But you can also have an equally bad impact or effect where someone is just going out and just writing tickets, or in a situation where they might want to issue a warning, but, oh, gee, my boss wants me to write more tickets. Okay, this person gets a ticket. And as fundamental as that may sound, that may actually be the effect if we approach our job that way. So I've never, since I've been a chief, I have not really put a strong emphasis on this sort of thing. I would rather they think about each individual violation and make an independent, judicious decision. I had John Geisberger take a look at the citations that we have been issuing and run them versus our warnings for traffic stops. And so historically, we have done, it used to, when I used to look at this pretty regularly when I was running patrol, it was about 50-50. So about 1 out of every 2 cars that we stopped would receive a warning or would receive a citation. And John reported back to me that he said it's for the period covered in this, or period covered in this chart. Actually, I think he might have went back a little farther than 2015. He said that we're now running about 1/3 are citations and 2/3 are warnings. So that can account for this number as well. That's just a lot more warnings. And something I've discussed with Jeff in the past when he's asked about these numbers on your behalf is, you know, to someone who is watching a police officer that has stopped someone on the side, let's say Marin, they don't know if they're getting a ticket or not, but the assumption is somebody's getting a ticket. And so we can have that kind of communal effect on everyone else and their driving behavior, even if we're handing out a warning, without sending someone into that kind of spiral of the court system and that endless loop of phone tree stuff, trying to figure out how to get their ticket taken care of. So even though a citation isn't issued, we can still have a positive effect on other people's driving behaviors by them seeing us enforcing traffic. And traffic enforcement is, as someone here said tonight, it's, you know, it's kind of an enforcement, but there's also that education component as well. And anytime I'm talking about numbers, generally, I tend to ask people, well, what would the ideal number be? And so I don't know what that is. Let's see, other factors that all these things relate. In fact, can you pull up the final slide that shows all the activity? I thought maybe if you looked at all this in context. Yes, please.
Can you blow that up just a little bit? I think it's actually on the lower two. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
So what this shows is, I don't know if this works for the camera or not, but what I have at the top line is total incidents. So it's the total number of incidents that we are involved in. Is there a, oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Look at the panel there. On the microphone, there's a lit panel. Looks like it's on.
It does look like it's on. Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. So if you look at this graphic, you can see the top blue line is the total number of incidents that patrol officers were involved, or total incidents from patrol over the course of the last, 7 years there? And then underneath that is officer-initiated activity. So officer-initiated activity includes anything that they initiate, which would include traffic stops. Traffic stops being this next line here, the gray line. And then underneath that is the citation number. So you can see that we're stopping cars, and these are the ones that are getting cited. And you can see that there's really not too much correlation between the number of traffic stops and the total citations given when compared to the patrol activity. There's a much bigger spike there, it looks like around 2015. And so you can see just overall, aside from the numbers going down a little bit since 14, and having been up that high the last time back in 2010, it's just not unusual for this to happen as staffing changes, as we, we're a small department, so small department can be, the impacts to a small department can be greater from things. So for example, I know it's in the news and everyone has heard that we recently closed out our investigation of a homicide that happened early in 2015. And so when that happened, there was an incredible amount of resources that we were pouring into that over the next few years on a regular daily basis, working that. And in conjunction with other things, the departure of, I had a key staff member go work for another agency who was a DUI trainer, and in a large department that wouldn't make much difference, but in a small department, one person can really make the difference. And so there's a number of factors that kind of come into play when we look at these trends and which way they're going. I'm not particularly concerned about any of them when I look at them. I watch them with curiosity and try and figure it out. But I don't know if I have any solid answers for why DUI is going down and the citations are going down that way. I'm not sure. But I'd love to talk with you about it.
And this is Albany, correct?
Yes, these are Albany numbers.
Well, one of my questions has always been, are there other trend lines we could look at? Is there a statewide DUI, citation rate, or a League of California cities kind of trend for cities of our size, or something along those lines?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything that the league does. Now, the DMV has a DUI arrest, like a comprehensive annual DUI arrest report thing that they do. I have not seen one of those in at least 3 years. I don't know what's happening at the state level, or they may be more like the federal crime reports, where they're typically, a year or so behind schedule in getting those reports out. That would be what I would look at for DUI, would be the state. It's the Department of Motor Vehicles, I believe, compiles an annual report for DUI arrests. Yeah, but again, a lot of those were driven by grant-funded activity, where officers are specifically brought in to work DUI, or specifically brought in to work on unsafe driving behaviors and things of that sort. So we may be actually getting back to normal non-grant funded numbers, I'm not sure.
And who was the source of these grants?
So the grants that we used to receive were from the California Office of Traffic Safety, OTS, which is I don't know how you would describe them. Are they perhaps the state's fiscal agent for federal highway safety funds? And so they're the one that kind of doles them out to different projects and programs for traffic safety throughout the state.
And they're drying up, it seems.
Well, they dried up for us.
Okay.
We were actually doing really well with them for a number of years prior to where the stats take off on your last chart there. I think our last grant from them was in the area of $60,000 for the year. And that was, we had started off with some smaller grants, and over the course of 3 or 4 or 5 years, we got up to much higher levels. And then it stopped. And I don't think we did anything wrong and made somebody angry, but I think they're readjusting priorities on where they're spending their money and who's getting it. And there are a lot of people asking for that money. They handle an incredible amount of grant program activity throughout the state. Yeah. And
Did we lose any grant writer or anything in your?
No.
On your?
No. Well, actually, that's a very good question. In a way, we did.
Mm-hmm.
So our main person who was responsible for these OTS grants for at least 4 or 5 years, pardon me, Sergeant Chris Willis. And Sergeant Chris Willis went inside to become a detective sergeant and actually started working on solving crimes inside and actually doing all of our training. So he schedules training for officers and whatnot. And so those other ancillary duties, he's not there. Now, I do have to say, though, he did get denied on the, when he was putting in. So it's not necessarily that he's not there, but there are now other higher priorities that I don't care if he does that grant or not, as long as he's getting this other stuff done. So.
Sure.
How big's the total staff?
27 sworn when we're at full staff. We're down 3 officers, and we, until recently, were down 3 911 dispatchers. I've just hired the last one of those. The last 2 of those come on board on Sunday, but then there'll be months of training before they're actually flying solo. So we're still looking for 3 officers. We have an open recruitment for that now, and 3 parking enforcement technicians that do parking enforcement on Solano and San Pablo and other areas. Still looking for 3 of those, and a crossing guard.
How many parking enforcement officers do you usually have?
So well, that's a good question. The way we staff that is we have X number of hours a week that need to be covered. And so we have a model where we have part-timers that can come in and work that. So if I had my current full staffing for that would be 4 part-timers.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, these numbers, none of these numbers include the parking citations that the parking enforcement people are writing. That's a completely different system that tracks those, and it doesn't play into this at all.
Here. Okay. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming in specifically for this item and fleshing out what's behind the numbers.
Great. Thank you. Anytime.
Appreciate it.
So we're going to move on to item 6.3, a report on direction from City Council on involving vehicles blocking driveways, vehicles in driveways blocking sidewalks.
I'm back.
Oh.
I'm back.
And better than ever.
By the way, traffic and safety has always been my favorite body to come before. I got to say that.
Oh, you're buttering us up now. What do you want?
Council, I said that. So, and that goes back to before I had this job. So on this subject, the City Council recently passed a resolution directing the police department to begin enforcing a certain kind of a violation that happens throughout town, and that is people who park in their driveway yet block the sidewalk. And they're forcing pedestrians, cyclists, people of all ages and abilities into the street to go around them, or even if not into the street, onto that portion of the kind of the apron or the approach pad that sometimes is very steep, and they're not allowing them to use the sidewalk. And unfortunately, we have many homes, many residential properties here in town that are designed as such that they have very short driveways. And if someone parks in their driveway, all or some of the sidewalk ends up, consequently, is getting blocked. And so the council directed us to begin enforcement. And so this is more advisory for you as traffic and safety that this is coming. Our plan is to begin by first making an informational notice to people. What we'll do is well, I won't get into the specifics because we haven't really worked them out yet, but we'll have a kind of a community education outreach phase, which will be followed but very specifically by a warning phase. So when we see the violation, that car is warned, it's given a warning, and we make a record that a certain particular car was warned for that violation. And then ultimately we switch into the citation phase where we would be issuing citations for the violation. It's a vehicle code violation, can't block the sidewalk. And it's our intent to try and get that rolling over the next few months, get that up and going, and see what kind of feedback we get. It was an unorthodox way to go about this because normally the police department would just cite the violation. But we have a long history of not citing those here in town, and given the kind of the significant change in enforcement posture, I asked the council to very clearly direct us to do that because I expect there's going to be a little pushback from some members of the community because I expect it. Not that I want to point my finger at the council and say they made me do it, but I just want to make sure that they understand that we're happy to do that. But it's a significant change in the way we enforce, and it's going to affect a lot of people. So that's what that's all about.
Great. Questions?
Do you have a threshold for what constitutes blocking the sidewalk, or how much of the sidewalk needs to be left available for people walking in wheelchairs and all that?
Nothing official. We have received some really good and valuable input from a member of the community that if I was to mention his name, I'm sure you all know it. And that has a 4-foot threshold, 4 feet being the minimum width for people to be able to pass by.
I think we have some sidewalks that are 3.5.
We have
don't
some.
We
have some.
We shoot for 4.
We shoot for 4, but I think there's
We have some very. If you really take the time, we have some very interesting sidewalks in this.
Oh yeah.
We have some that are Very interesting. They have like telephone poles right in the middle of them and stuff like that, so, or fire hydrants. So the answer is no, we don't have anything official. We have kind of an idea where we might want to start. And we're going to have to see where this leads us, because there are some, my Albany home, when I lived here, I would park in my driveway and it would block like about that much of the sidewalk. But if the sidewalk's 3 feet, that's a pretty good chunk of that. And it's going to be a little dicey as we work our way through this. But we're certainly going to start with, I should have brought you some pictures. We're going to start with the ones that are just clearly, obviously blocking the entire sidewalk, and we'll work backwards from there. We'll start off with the real clear violations and try and get people to change their habits and whatnot. Yes.
And do you detect these violations just on random patrol, or do most of them come from people calling it in and saying?
We don't traditionally get too many calls on it. We have received calls on them in the past, but we will go out as part of this campaign, I guess you would call it. We will go out and begin proactively enforcing it, because that is the direction from council.
Okay. And that's through all the neighborhoods throughout the whole city, or?
Yes, well, yes. And this parking behavior should not be confused with people in some neighborhoods. So for example, the Washington Avenue neighborhood on the Hill, where they're parking
Parallel.
Parallel, yes. Instead of perpendicular, they're parallel and on the curb, because in some neighborhoods, and that one is an example, if we cite people for parking illegally and make them park legally, they block the road.
Mm-hmm.
The roadway would be impassable, because neither side of the road is red curbed. So, yeah, so this is perpendicular vehicles only. I guess I shouldn't say perpendicular only, but blocking the sidewalk in that manner. People with driveways blocking the sidewalk. How does that sound?
Other questions? Do you have a public comment on this?
No, it probably was a public comment. I apologize for the parallel. Perpendicular versus parallel. It's a signage issue.
Why don't you come up to the microphone and give us your name?
So I'm Adam Gratz. I'm a physician. I live on Canes, and I have two teenagers. I had two teenagers. I lost one to age, not to traffic. So, yeah. So these are the jokes, folks. So the signage is there's this beautiful new addition, as everyone knows, on Canes here in Marin, with the sidewalks, and it's great. It's really beautiful to see that. There's a beautiful sign too as you're going east, which says clearly no left turn onto Canes, because it's a one-way, and no U-turns, which, you know, most people don't make U-turns there anyway. If you took that sign and duplicated it on the other side of that pole, you would prevent all these crazy, stressed-out drivers from going onto Canes. And Canes is the most populated street, I think, in the city. On the 0.3-mile area there from no speed bumps from the one-way to the speed bumps, I counted 17 multi-unit buildings. That's like heavily populated. And a lot of them are kids. A lot of these people, you know, they move here for the schools. So anyway, that's it. One sign.
Signage at Canes and Marin.
What's that?
So you're talking about signage.
Signage at Canes and Marin. So this was the closest I saw was signage on Solano and Marin, but I probably should have made this during the first public comment period, but
ideally, but
judgment call.
we can certainly take your comments. Thank you. We're flexible.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So let's bring it back to the commission. Opinions about perpendicular vehicles, or mostly perpendicular vehicles. I think it's hard not to use that nomenclature when separating it from parallel parking potential conflicts, but yeah.
Just in general, if people don't see enforcement of something, they come to assume that it's okay. And we tend to see a gradual degradation over time, where it becomes more and more the norm, and it gets really hard to walk down the street. So while I appreciate that we're not, actively going out there to just find someone to cite them, we do want usable sidewalks. So in terms of the approach that's been described, since the decision's already been made by council to do this, I think the approach sounds quite rational.
My first thought, though, is the tightness of parking and the actions that we're taking right now with the red curbing at intersections. Like the squeeze is on. Calling that out. If they can't park in their driveway, then it's driving more of these cars out onto the street, which is tight. But I think there's too many cars on the street. That's my opinion.
Perhaps a question for the group. When I briefly lived in Sacramento, I had a pretty small garage built in, 1939 or something. And to get my car in, I had a trick where I hung a tennis ball like 6 inches from the wall. So as soon as my bumper hit it, I knew I was there. I find myself wondering how well people are using their driveway space and whether there's any tips or tricks we could offer people so that they get all the way up to the end of the driveway without running into their house or their garage door or whatever it might be. Maybe if you've got a plastic post you can put there, because obviously there may not be a roof to hang a tennis ball from, but so it's not just we're enforcing, but we're trying to support people doing the right thing without feeling like they're losing their parking or they're risking damaging their car or their house.
The situations I think of, though, are these enormous cars in driveways that were meant for much smaller. I mean, I guess I can think of some smaller cars that are protruding out into the sidewalk somewhat, but
I can think of smaller cars that came up when I was surveying the Washington on the Hill area.
Yeah.
There's a house with 2 parallel or perpendicular parking spots, and there are very small cars in them, and they still block the sidewalk. So that in that particular location, they're going to have to make some hard choices.
because there's not room for a tennis ball to keep.
No, there.
It just isn't really a
There
part.
just isn't room. That's going to be a tough one. I agree that the squeeze is on, but the
Gig
squeeze
cars,
is about.
let's hope they take
Yeah,
off.
absolutely.
I don't know.
The squeeze is on, but there are alternatives like
Yeah.
gig cars, and
I've seen
and
more.
This is all in the service of
Right.
making sure our sidewalks are passable for all users.
Absolutely.
And I'm pretty focused on that.
No, I fully agree. I just know that we hear a lot about this. Parking is a
Question.
huge one.
Some others haven't had a chance to talk.
Yeah.
I jumped in earlier than I usually do, but Harry and
Well, I just wanted to bring up a question that I know we've mentioned here before, which is if a person finds that their driveway is not usable because of this restriction, is it okay for them to park parallel on the street, blocking their own driveway?
That's a great question that I anticipate we're going to have to delve into. So the vehicle code, I believe, allows, well, generally the vehicle code says you cannot do that. Doesn't matter if it's your own driveway. We tend to not get too worked up about that. So that may be an option for some of these people, but the vehicle code offers an exemption if the city council permits it. And I think it may actually be a permit that they get, that council has to issue or have a procedure by which a permit is issued for you to do that.
So each individual who wants to do this has to get that
I
permit?
believe that's the way the vehicle code reads. It's been a while since I read it, but there is some flexibility in there to do something like that, to have a permit to block your driveway if the council passes a resolution or an ordinance that allows that. So we may be there in a few months. That's certainly something that may happen, because that may end up being the alternative for people that can't use their driveways.
But it sounds like maybe that's not something that you can talk to people about during the education phase, because it's not really officially approved.
Yeah, it's.
Like, people will have to come to that
about it.
idea on their own.
I don't even think that, I don't recall that even coming up at the conversation with city council. Yeah. And I was just going to point out another thing with the sidewalks. The city is also concerned about all the investments they're making in that infrastructure, and they want people to park lawfully so they're not damaging those sidewalks as well.
You were.
I was just going to ask Jeff, do you happen to know what the minimum front yard setback is?
It's 15 feet from, to the property line, which is usually between 1 and 3 feet inboard of the edge of the sidewalk. So normally a code-compliant house has room in the driveway to park a normal-sized vehicle and not block the sidewalk.
Okay.
But, probably 15 or 20% of the houses in Albany have a non-compliant front yard, and that's a little tougher.
Right. Okay.
The other solution I would offer to people that maybe we can gently encourage is there's a relatively small percentage of people who actually park their car in their garage, because we have it all stuff in our garage. And
Or wine.
And yeah. So for some people, that might be the solution, and there is, Waste Management has their bulky waste pickup arrangement, and you can get a nice big pile of stuff out there, and it'll go away.
You can't actually fit a car in my garage, unless it was like an old Austin Mini, or whatever it is. And it's behind a fence that was installed before I bought the house. But that's another thing entirely. I've actually seen some situations where people will park their car out over the part of the sidewalk, because then that allows them to open their garage door. So we're going to have to just do the education and ask them to make a different choice. There are lots of situations. And I like the spirit of your suggestion was, offer encouragement and some sort of positive, encouragement and practical ways to deal with it. And I think that's very constructive.
Might work for about 3 people.
Well, yeah, so maybe we link to the make your own indicator site, that whatever. I think we've teased this one out, unless, Robert, you have anything.
No, I'm okay.
I think we've teased this one out, and thank you for bringing this to us. This is good news, and we'll look forward to that. Jeff, we talked about skipping to 6.5 first. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the Brown Act, we can maybe blend this conversation together a little bit, because we wanted to both talk about the signage that we wanted to have you take a look at in the near term, and then as you're talking about the intersections, it kind of morphs into we're looking for you to make a recommendation to the City Council about a grant application to do more substantial improvements to the intersection. So if we at least start with the signage, Justin will give you an introduction to some of the ideas that we have, and then we can maybe morph into the discussion about the grant application.
Great.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so we're talking about one of the intersections that's in item 6.4, so we didn't want to have a discussion about the intersection after you made your recommendation. So this has come before the commission previously, specifically for signage of potential conflicts with the users of the Ohlone Greenway. There was a suggestion at that discussion to also discuss the vehicle movements and signing for the vehicle movements for clarity and compliance with the striping that's in place at Marin and Solano. This is, of course, a short-term fix. We will discuss in the other item. There is a work underway to do the bigger signal upgrades that would allow more improvements to the intersection and better control of the vehicle and pedestrian and bicycle movements. But the main task I was given was to look at what signage we could put in to make it clear for vehicles traveling north and south on Masonic through the intersections to have greater compliance with the existing striping. In the MUTCD, this is the standard signage recommendation for when you have a right turn bay with a bicycle facility to have a sign for the start of the right turn lane and the yield to bikes, and then the right turn, must turn right sign. Our configuration is slightly different in that we have a smaller pocket where it's a dash line for where the bicycle should go rather than a formal bicycle lane. We could modify slightly from the standard with just right lane must turn right with the except bicycle to rather than have the bike lane begin when it's really not a formal bicycle lane and it doesn't go through the intersection or continue on either side. The other issue really with the striping and with the amount of signage is that these are pretty small bays and a pretty narrow bit of striping. So the idea of having a sign at the start of the lane beginning and further up with the striping, I see as a little problematic. You don't really have a lot of distance to really space those signs and have them visible. This is the northbound intersections. You really have, I think, room for one sign through where you have the striping to really get the attention of a driver. If you put two up there, I think you're blocking the other pretty quickly as the driver approaches. The southbound, it's pretty similar. You currently have a loading zone parking, so you have sort of a limited period of visibility when there's a car parked as the striping is starting to really, you have a limited shot. The other piece of this, there was already a discussion at an earlier commission meeting about conflicts with the greenway and the signage. This is from the active transportation plan and the recommended sign location for northbound traffic to Warren at the right turn. The commission discussion looked at this yield to bike and ped signage, and there was a discussion of putting it right where currently in the picture the share the road sign is, and having the reverse of it on the opposite side to at least as someone's looking at that turn signal that's right by there to Warren. I would recommend a slight different, basically a sign saying the same thing, but there's a little more standardization with this sign below is sort of, I think, it's been recommended to be incorporated into national guidance. It's not quite there yet, but that's in terms of federal facilities, it's a pretty standard process to get approval to use that sign. So I think using something that's a little more standardized but is basically saying the same thing would be what I would recommend as a slight change from the earlier direction. But putting all those together, I would say, so for that intersection that this was discussed at Marin on the south side as you are heading north, putting one right lane must turn right sign. This would be there's an existing, I think 2 out of the 3 approaches have existing signs that say no parking. Even though it's a red curb, you don't really need to sign the hours that you're not supposed to park along the curb probably. We could use those signposts for the right lane must turn right as someone's approaching. So if a couple cars are stacked up and are blocking the striping, this would be a signal for the vehicles not to go along the right to try to avoid a left-turning car if they were going straight. And again, as was discussed previously, putting replacing the share of the road signage at the corner with the yield signage. Here, there's another no parking sign. It's far enough past that where that truck was parked in the other photo that I think, you've got some visibility there. You probably don't want it too much closer because if you're far enough away that cars are blocking your view of the paint, the striping, that, you're not going to see that sign either. And then on the south side of Solano, this would be, I think, the one location where there would be a new sign post put in, but there's, space to put that in along the greenway there. Here, this intersection wasn't discussed with the yield signage, so you could consider trying to put one there closer to the corner. I think that first tree in the landscaping is a little taller now. You might still be able to get over it with some signage currently that may be blocked after another year or two of growth. But if you're really trying to get people's attention, you could try to put that sign here as well. We could just try it at the Marin one where you already discussed at a previous meeting and see how that functions and whether, we think that merits putting it at another intersection. But
I'd like one of those three-wheel miniaturized Priuses.
So that was what I wanted to present. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Would you mind just going through all the slides again, including the early ones with the standard signage for the larger intersection? So the sign that you're not recommending is the one that says begin right turn lane, yield to bikes.
That's correct. With the dashed bicycle lane, it's
Right.
not quite an establishment on a bicycle lane. And often I think this facility is if you're having a bike lane facility approaching approaching an intersection where a right turn lane is, there's a break in that bicycle lane. And the bikes are having to cross the right turns to come across. So you could, I think you could still.
I don't need your justification right now. The presentation went by a little bit quickly for me, so I just need to see the images one more time. Thanks, and slowly through the rest of them. So, okay. And then each of the intersections with those white vertical lines showing where. Okay, so this is northbound approaching Marin.
That's correct.
Okay. And the next one is southbound approaching Marin. And there we just have the one sign about right lane must turn right except bikes. We don't have we don't have anything about the Ohlone Greenway for these southbound left turners.
Yeah, that was my question.
So what was discussed at previous meeting was across the street near the pole with the green light for the left turning vehicle is where that share the road sign currently is across the way.
The same one that the northbound traffic is.
At a prior meeting, it was discussed putting the left turn version of that yield sign on that same pole.
Just on the back side of that same.
Yeah, we don't have any median here for a left turning vehicle to really have a sign on their side as they approach the intersection. Putting one over at the corner on the right, you're not really going to get the attention of someone turning left that's looking across the way. You may raise the attention a little bit with the sign way across at the corner. It may not be all that visible, but it's next to the signal that they're looking at and the incoming traffic that they're looking at, so it may be a reminder for them to also look at the bicycle and pedestrians coming. It's going to be small. It's across the intersection. It's not going to do a whole lot, but it's what we have space to do.
And then the next one was northbound approaching Solano, and here you're recommending one or two?
Here, the recommendation is the one. There was not a discussion of the yield signage at the previous meeting. Your earlier conversation focused on the Marin intersection. We could do the same signage at this corner just for both. You could do it pointing both directions still here.
And that would also require a new signpost?
That would be a new signpost, and there's a little more visibility issue. That tree this is Google Earth. I think my earlier photo, I took the picture. It's a little taller now. So on the right here, the visibility is maybe, a little more obstructed now than it was when that other photo was taken.
Okay. And then the final approach was southbound approaching Solano, which hasn't been treated at all yet, so you're not recommending any signage there?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you for walking through that a little more leisurely pace for me.
Sure. Sorry.
So southbound approaching Solano won't have the left turn yield to pedestrian or bikes on the greenway?
So if you, well, I would be interested in your discussion about whether similar treatment that was discussed earlier for Marin and Masonic is merited at this intersection. You don't have the left turn bay coming the other direction, but you do have left turning movements that could also see a yield sign.
So that possibility would be to use a single pole at the southeast corner with a sign facing south for the northbound traffic and a different mirror image sign facing north for the southbound traffic.
That's correct. It would be near where that tree is.
Okay, got it.
On the left there. So it would be for yield turning for right turn movements in this approach, someone coming across from the other side making a left turn, they're looking at the light pole that's right next to that and would see a yield to left turn movements.
Got it. So the pole's close enough to the signal.
Yes. Yes. So it would be near where they're looking for at the green light that they're facing. It would be it's across the intersection, so it is going to be much smaller in terms of visibility for someone looking from across the intersection.
And that couldn't go on top of the signal head? That sign like at Marin? I just wonder if consistency is, oh, there you go. Maybe not.
There was some discussion, I think, at the previous meeting. The original proposal was there. For Marin and Masonic, it was settled on at the signpost, share the road, because of the logistics, I think, of trying to get the signage with the existing additional signs already strapped on. But
So in this photo, where would that pole be relative to the? Okay.
So a new pole would be in this corner here.
Yeah.
This one is further away because of the wider crosswalk, so you have less visibility. So you could just go ahead with the one that was already discussed at the Marin intersection and not do a yield signage for this intersection and await us doing signal upgrades to be able to make.
How are the two different between the Solano one and the Marin one?
You want me to go to Marin?
Marin, yeah. Same.
Is it just that the curb ramp at Solano is wider and doesn't leave room for a good place to put the signpost?
There you go. Ah, okay. Yeah, it's a different setup.
So there, the whole signal is actually behind the curb ramp.
Yeah. Where's the sign going on this one? Is it on top of the signal head or on that?
So the sign was being discussed, put on where this is the back of that share the road sign currently, right next to the signal.
While we're there, can we zoom in on that? There's a sign behind the signal head that's actually for the trail.
That's correct. It's the
I
pedestrians.
hope to make a
on one side.
comment on that in a minute when I have a chance, but as an example.
Would you like me to try to get closer to that?
If you could, yeah, that'd be great. That's going to be a little tricky. While he's doing that, does anybody else have any comments? We're all fascinated.
Getting dizzy.
Maybe that's going to be a little too tough to zoom in on.
Does that work?
That's great, thank you. Generally, though, I usually go last on comments, so I want to allow others to.
Well, is there a question of whether or not the commission wants to have the signs be consistent for the left turn yielding at Solano and at Marin?
Yes.
I think we should put them both in. I mean, it's not the best location at Solano, but better than not, I think.
I guess my question would be, is there some counterindication reason not to put the sign there in terms of cost or information overload or anything else?
Yeah. It is odd, right? Because you're probably 10 feet away from the corner or something like that. So it's
It might
strange,
not-
right? That you're.
Might not be very effective.
Yeah, it might not be effective.
Yeah, it would be effective. You're not usually looking for signage like that, I think, across the intersection in that location, especially for the left turn movement. We're talking about additional signage for directing through movement, and we're now talking about warning about the turn. So how much signage and the effectiveness of each additional sign as you're adding more is the main consideration.
So the minimum plan that we're considering would be essentially two new signs that say
Right lane
must turn right, and one sign that has two faces, both saying turning vehicles yield. And then the question is whether to have a second sign at Solano that also says turning vehicles yield. I don't have a strong opinion. Does anyone else?
I like the turning vehicles yield to bike and ped, and I think putting them at both intersections could be positive. There's certainly a lot of people turning at Solano and Marin. I though, on the right lane must turn right, I'm more of a visual person, and I strongly prefer a sign more like the one that's on the trail, where it's, visually shows what's in the lanes. And there must be a reason that you didn't choose that. Maybe you could speak to that.
Sure. So there's the arrow directional lane version. There's no standard practice around bicycle lanes being included in that, and the clarity of bike movement versus lane movement, and there's no standardization around that, and the risk of mixing someone just looking visually and being able to parse out what's being directed for the bicycle versus for the vehicle. The signs get complicated and lose the sort of immediate visual of just having the turn arrow movements. There is one example from Oregon that focuses on this part is for the bicycle from going straight, and this part is for the right. That's more visual, but it's more focused on who should be where within that pocket versus the overall through movements versus turning movements of the overall intersection. So I looked at that. It's not standard. It also can be confusing for folks because it's trying to be clear about bikes should do this and cars should do that, but it's not a standardized signage system either.
Interesting. So, well, the sign that you're proposing in Figure 1 really only deals with the right lane. The visual sign that you talked about from Oregon deals with the right lane and the bike pocket. We don't really have a solution that gives a clear overall picture, as I understand it. I realize that I'm a visual person, so I'm not going to make it through this sign as written, but I would make it through a visual one, even if it was complicated in the way you'd say. Now, I understand that's me. But it sounds like you had a great deal of trouble finding a sign, or a sign does not exist that clearly communicates what we're trying to do here. And I understand that.
Are you envisioning a sign that would look essentially like a snapshot of what the white paint on the street looks like, but put on a sign instead of painted on the pavement?
That's kind of what I was envisioning. And the impetus behind that has been previously stated, is that once you get a couple cars parked there, you can't see what's on the road. And you also can't see it from far enough back necessarily to make a good decision. especially if there's traffic.
So the idea is to convey the exact same thing that the paint on the street conveys, but to put it in a place where more people can see it.
Yeah, and it wouldn't need words. Would that still be too complicated?
There is no standard signage that follows that.
Is this a standard intersection?
So there's so there are signs that would show us vehicles in one lane turn left and go straight, and vehicles in the next lane are right turn only. There are some examples of signs that haven't been standardized that focus on where bikes and cars should be within crossing the turning movement and through movement. So I have not seen any signage for doing an overall intersection. The one example, so in the example from Oregon that had the sign that showed this is a combined lane, bikes go here and go straight and cars turn, they did have, if you have a bar across the top of the intersection, you can have a sign for each lane that is specific for that lane. But I have not seen one sign that shows the bikes and the multiple lanes all together in one visual.
I understand. I guess from a driver's perspective, we see these signs getting off the freeway all the time with 5-6 lanes. Oh geez, which lane am I in? And
South Van Ness, anybody?
And I'm going at speed. This is a slower intersection. There are 3 lanes. I can only fit my car in 2 of them. It doesn't sound that complex.
So if the commission would like us to develop a custom sign for your review, we'll take a look at that. And I think we'd want to bring it back to you just to because it's not standard, and have it vetted by you. And technically, our city engineer needs to review that if it's a non-standard sign. And we've talked to him about it. He's open to whatever we need to do to inform the motorist what's going on. If that's the commission's direction, that's great. That's why we're here.
Is that a lot of extra work or expense? Or?
I've never done one before, so we'll find out.
I guess I'm since it's a short-term fix and we have a standard sign that kind of conveys it well enough, maybe for some people, maybe not so much for others. I wouldn't want to make it take much longer or take up too much more of your time just to have this kind of ideal visual version of the sign. If you think it's something that's fairly easy, I think it would be good.
Yeah.
I just don't know if we want to invest that much in this particular project, given that we're planning on redoing the whole intersection in a few years anyway.
The other thing we've talked about is doing this incrementally, and whatever we do first, monitor it, and we might find that it is the compliance level improves, and maybe not, and maybe start with the less expensive approach, and get the baseline data of compliance. Start with the easy off-the-shelf signs. See whether it improves, and then come back to you again in a month or 2 and say, well, we're still getting a problem.
I would just add that I did go looking into a number of different options which I've now discussed, but I pulled back from that a little bit. One, because we are about to talk about other additions to the intersection. This really is trying to make sure people understand which lane they should be in as they approach, which standard signage does do. And so I pulled back, and once I really honed in on the short-term task is making sure people understand where they're supposed to be approaching the intersection, and the clearest sign that people are used to seeing about, if I go in this lane, I'm supposed to turn right, maybe serves that purpose of notifying for that intent. And additional design work really can go into making sure the intersection improvement, but that's sort of where I sort of ended up backpedaling back to more standardized signage.
I just brought up a picture of this Mission Street in South Van Ness in San Francisco, where the sign actually has 2 U-turn arrows and then a gentle left turn and then like 5 or 6
not our
lanes
intersection.
worth of arrows. And
Yeah.
and yet you can sort of take it all in. I mean, it takes some effort, but I think it's better than the words.
Honestly, I think I like the visual sign as well, just my personal stylistic preference. And I do think that if it almost literally shows what's on the pavement, that's kind of all we need. You know, if you take the black and white sign and you put your solid vertical dividing line with a through left arrow to the left of it, and then a bike symbol and a dashed line, and then a right turn with the word only underneath it, that's pretty much your sign. I don't know. Would that be clear to you, Ken?
I think that would be much clearer for the majority of drivers. Because it lays out all 3 lanes, quickly, visually, just as it's on the ground.
What I'm not worried about is the cyclists getting confused about where they can go. Because any cyclist who's on the road instead of on the path has a pretty good idea how they're going to avoid getting caught by the right turning cars or the left turning cars.
And they're going at a speed where they can see the symbols on the road pretty well anyway.
Yeah, they have reaction time. It took me about once or twice through the intersection to figure out, when I want to turn left, I'm in the traffic lane with the left turning cars. Not very complicated. Most of it, I think, the reminder that I perceive as the most important is that right lane is for turning right, not for jumping around the left turning car that you're waiting for.
I disagree a little bit about cyclists. I think it's still great for them to have the heads up, especially when their cars, if you've got several cars in the through lane, you've got one car here turning into the right lane, being able to look up and see where you need to track into ahead of time, I think becomes valuable.
Maybe we put a through arrow with the bike symbol, because that's really all you ought to do from that position.
Right. Other thoughts? Okay. Can I get a motion? Do we need a motion?
I think a motion would be good, and tell us whether or not you'd like to see it again before we spend money on it. If you want us to
Well, and we still have a possibility of going ahead with the standard sign and considering the more custom sign later if the standard sign doesn't seem to work well. The commission may reject that possibility, but.
So I think the standard sign for right turning traffic yield to bikes and pedestrians, the semi-standard sign, if you will, certainly seems the way to go for that one. But the one that says right lane must turn right versus having the diagram of what the lanes do, I think then we are going with the custom sign on that.
I'm certainly interested in that. Why don't we divide it up into 2 motions? And I'm speaking, so I'll just enunciate. The first motion would be adding turning vehicles yield to bikes and pedestrians, double-facing sign at both Marin and Masonic and Solano and Masonic in the positions indicated.
Second that.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Everybody said aye. You want to try the?
Sure. I would move that staff develop a graphic sign representing the lane geometries and restrictions per the discussion that we've just had.
Which, if I can enunciate,
So-
it's essentially what's on the road with the added word only.
Correct. For the right turn lane.
Yeah.
I guess my question is how much will that slow down this installation?
Well, I would say that staff develop it and implement it. I don't see a need to come back to us.
Not if it's as described.
So that, I would hope,
Agreed.
would be quick.
So
Relatively.
is that, so do you feel that that'll turn this into a 6 to 12 month marathon, or is
And
it?
Freed may know better, that will know better
Just
than,
do.
than us about how long it takes to get a custom-made sign these days.
Shouldn't be too bad, but then again, I've got a sign shop that'll make them.
Can they do
Maybe
one
they can
extra?
make an extra.
Oh, careful, careful.
I make no comments on
There's no end, there's no end to those sorts of requests if they start granting them, so.
We can report back to the commission next month, and if it feels like, if the cost or the time is prohibitive, we'll check in with the chair and we'll report
Sounds
back
great.
to you.
That sounds great. So under those conditions, could we get a second to Fareed's motion?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Great. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. And I think
Just
that,
wish we
that takes care, sorry?
I just wish I had this turning vehicles yield to pedestrians on Pierce Street.
At Buchanan?
Buchanan.
Yeah.
I would like to carry it with me. Put it in peaceful spaces.
You could get a sandwich board to ride your bike with.
Maybe I should.
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna sort of segue into 6.4.
Should we get an extension?
Oh, thank you. Would you like to?
Well, we have a little bit left. I move we continue to 10:30.
Would somebody be willing to second?
Sure, second.
Robert seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? The meeting is continued, and we're moving on to 6.4, related to the State of California Active Transportation Program Cycle 4 grant applications.
So for this item, the State Active Transportation Program is expected to shortly adopt guidelines and the official program, and essentially at the same time or the next day release the call for projects. It's a large $440 million program, including both a regional portion that'll be granted through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and a statewide grant program that'll cover 4 fiscal years from 2019-2020 through 2022-23. The deadline for applications for both programs is expected to be July 31st, so it's going to be a very quick turnaround. And so we are bringing to you a discussion of what applications, what we should be preparing applications for. Our recently approved capital improvement program improvement plan included 2 projects to be submitted for this, and we are recommending those projects move forward and we prepare applications for them. Those 2 include the Complete Street San Pablo Buchanan and the Masonic Marin intersection improvements.
And just for the record, you all received an email from Preston Jordan, I believe this morning, recommending the cycle track, the gap in the cycle track from the UC Village Mixed-Use Project to the corner here at San Pablo, and Marin is also a potential candidate. That was not identified, so our recommendation is basically consistent with the capital improvement program. The gap project that he's referring to is in the capital improvement program, but is currently not, a specific source of funds has not been identified.
Does that mean it's targeted for later implementation?
I believe so. I think it'd take me a second to pull it up, but I think it was targeted for maybe a 2020 implementation.
And these things are indicated for an earlier implementation?
I believe so. Right. The cycle track is targeted for estimated cost $660,000, and there's no funding at this time. We could go through the Alameda County Transportation Commission and use some of their measures, but we haven't started that process.
He also mentioned, I think in this particular message, and certainly in earlier ones, that you want to make sure that the original plan of having a bulb out on the southeast corner of Marin at the Greenway be bulbed out. Is that in these plans?
So we're working with Parisi Transportation Consultants to help us prepare grant applications. We'll be working with them, I should say. They've successfully helped other municipalities in earlier rounds, and so we've been starting to work with them to develop some concepts. We'll bring those to the commission in the coming months. And among the issues, it's very, as you know, it's a complicated intersection, and they're looking at the trade-offs with bulb outs and how feasible they would be.
But the concept of the bulb out is in the scope of this item that you listed of related intersection improvements at Marin, Masonic and Marin.
The concept is being evaluated, and we'll let you decide whether that's something that will work.
Great. So we'll have further looks at that. Great.
So what would be the impact again of trying to fit in the cycle track extension to Buchanan for this cycle as opposed to whatever it's scheduled for?
There are a couple of things. First of all, there's just diluting the time and energy that we have in preparing grant applications. Sure. There's also managing our, and this is really more of a question for Robert Gonzalez, our capital improvement program manager, of managing the flow of work and delivering projects when we promise them. And that's something that we're taking pretty seriously. We've overloaded ourselves in recent years, and we're not getting things done on the schedule that we originally anticipate because we had this big load of projects. And so we're trying to be more realistic in our capital improvement program about when we can actually deliver projects.
That makes sense. Thanks.
I feel like the Marin Masonic project, for example, is one that there's a lot of kids using the Greenway to get to and from school. So I sort of feel like I would prioritize that.
Right, you don't have that down there.
Yeah, I mean, the cycle track is cool, but we got to work with Caltrans. It's,
right.
That's going to be a complicated project. So my inclination in terms of what's deliverable is kind of sticking with the staff recommendation, try to get those done.
I think that makes a good point, and we can continue to work. It's an obvious project that we want to get done, and it really, closing gaps is a particularly valuable investment. In addition to working with Caltrans, we have to work with the university to get right-of-way. There's also some permitting work that would have to be done with Fish and Wildlife because of Village Creek. Nice. There will have to be, the sidewalk there is very narrow, and so there'll have to be further, kind of almost like a bridge over Village Creek. Yeah. That's where the expense comes in, I think, more than anything else.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
So I'll just move the staff recommendation.
Can I get a second?
I second.
Further discussion?
I have heart for these two.
I think they're good, and there are lots of other projects, and we should take a look back at our active transportation plan occasionally and see what else is still there. And I know we're going to talk about that eventually, but...
Yeah, well, it takes both the active transportation plan, but also the capital improvement program. That's where we're trying to be realistic about the time and money that we have.
Nobody here is going to assail you for trying to be responsible. We may get frustrated, but we certainly respect it. I do, anyway. I shouldn't speak for everybody.
I'm going to assail you. No, I'm not.
You're going to reserve the right to assail?
I'll reserve the right to assail
I think you, and you should feel likewise, I guess. So let's see. Do we get a second on? We get a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. Let's see. That moves us on to item number 7. And the update on the gig car share launch.
Sure, we were both racing to pull that up. So gig launched on April 6th in the city of Albany. They reported at the 2-week mark, so April 20th. So after 2 weeks of data, they gave us some initial numbers. They had 151 members within the city of Albany before the launch. They've added 17 since their launch. They've had 314 trips taken from Albany, averages about 22 per day. They've had some education issues with the cars parking in the 90 minutes, so they've been issued about a dozen tickets by the city over that 2-week period, and they're working to educate their members on compliance with the city's traffic rules. They've done some marketing, but are looking for ways to get in front of more people and promote some more signups. So if you have suggestions for them or want to communicate with them, let me know. But they plan to do some more engagement and promotion within the city in the coming months.
Are the parking restrictions showing up on the app? I signed up, I haven't used it yet, so not sure.
I actually have not used the app myself, but they, I believe, have marked the 90-minute zones, or they expressed that they were going to be, and that they were informing the members that they could not leave they can, if you're paying for the car and stopping and continuing to hold the car while you're using it, you can park there, but you're not supposed to leave it in those zones when you're done with the car.
I actually thought it went beyond you're not supposed to. I thought that the app was designed so that there is no option to end your trip if you're located in one of those zones.
Okay.
But apparently not, because people have, it
tickets.
sounds like people have ended their trips in those zones. So it must be more of like a bit of advice rather than a restriction in the way the app works.
If it continues to be an issue, we can discuss that with them. But yeah, I do not know how refined their GPS is in terms of like if you're in a specific spot that they can code as 90 minutes, then they can.
Frankly, I was a little skeptical that their GPS could be that detailed, but I thought that's what they said they would do.
That's what they said, and now it doesn't seem like they've gotten that dialed in.
It doesn't always work. Okay.
Do you know what their status is with UC Village? In terms of whether it's okay for renters to leave cars there or not? Yeah? Okay.
I don't know if they're.
I know that's sort of a gray area and out of the purview of the city staff.
I haven't heard of issues that they've had specifically with UC Village. I know a lot of their users they've had a number of users already, even before they launched here, from UC Village, and getting to and from the campus, I think, is one of their prime user base. But I haven't heard any parking issues affiliated with that.
Do we know if they've consistently kept whatever number of vehicles they were expecting to keep in Albany?
Compared to Lime Bike?
Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't heard anything. Their email says they're maintaining 15 to 20 in the service area.
Okay.
So I see them around. I don't get the sense of the wild variations that we've seen with the Lime Bikes.
And aside from the tickets, has anybody in the city staff heard complaints from people saying they're taking up my parking space or anything like that?
We haven't. A week or two ago, we asked the police chief, and he hadn't heard any. At least it hadn't gotten to him.
Okay.
So it's nice and quiet.
I'm sorry. was looking at my notes.
Next.
Next. 7.2, schedule for Solano Avenue Complete Streets initial workshop.
This was just an update, so it's on your calendars following the Memorial Day break in late May, that week right after the holiday Monday. We're still finalizing the schedule, but planning to do a couple of days of like charrette-style workshop, evening open house workshop with some sort of all-day focus groups and design work to get going on some input and design options for that project. So just to get, it's not a formal date yet, but we're looking probably that Wednesday evening, I believe we should be finalizing that shortly. Will be the initial kickoff with activities and workshop work continuing through the second half of the week.
That'd be May 30th, right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Moving on to 7.3, future agenda items.
So on this, these are all moving around a little bit, but these are things that we're actively working on that we want to bring to you. Electric vehicle program, we have grant funds now from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and there are some new details on requirements for parking associated with
So this is charging stations.
Charging stations. So there's a little bit of fine tuning, and then we need to bring back to you for policy discussion about what the policies should be about rates and amount of time that a user's allowed to be in the space. And so that will probably be in the next month or two. The commission has talked, Commissioner Chomsky has been kind enough to start to dive into some of the data for traffic calming. What we would like to do, in addition to refining the criteria, we want to refine the process so that we have a approval process once or twice a year that feeds into the subsequent paving project that follows. And so there's a little bit more of a seamless sequence of steps rather than have you make a decision about a speed hump or something else and then nothing seems to happen for a while. And so like sidewalks, we talk about where do we want the sidewalks and then it goes out to bid. So again, maybe once or twice a year, we can always accept applications for traffic calming or requests, but bring them together at once for your review and recommendation. And make it happen within a few months after that.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. Central Avenue is a Caltrans project in Richmond and El Cerrito. That's like the Gilman project in Berkeley. There may be some bicycle circulation considerations to that, and we're just starting to get into the details of that, and we'll be wanting to report back to you on that. With respect to the school district traffic management, it came up in discussion this evening in the earlier agenda item. We do want to come back to you with some recommendations on how to handle that. There's been some staffing changes. Alan Gard, who has been the business officer for the school district, is no longer with the district, so I'm not sure when we can expect that. Originally, I had talked to him about June or July. Obviously, the project's under construction, is going to be done later this year, I believe. So we're anxious to get that back before you to figure out where both the treatment of the intersection itself and all the students will be crossing back and forth all day, plus refining red zones, green zones, white zones, and so forth. There's a couple of projects Public Works Department would like to talk to you about. They have a slurry seal project that they would like to.
Jeff, I'm sorry. I just noticed that you didn't say anything about circulation or you talked about basic sort of on the ground at the site sorts of things. Would we be able to consider other more systemic local treatments at the same time?
With respect to the middle school?
Yeah.
Sure, I think that's maybe a different project. We want to do something in the next few months, so when the new San Gabriel campus opens, we've got the right striping and curb markings in place. Certainly, a lot of things that we would like to improve about that neighborhood, and we've talked about that to some degree.
Okay.
So I think there's probably an immediate project, and then there's a longer-term project. Again, going through this list, the Public Works Department's considering bringing forward a slurry seal project, which would involve an opportunity to do some striping and signage without doing the base pavement. And so they'd like to bring that to you for your review. Then the modernization of the municipal code. This is my pet project of bringing the commission's guidelines and procedures and policies up to date, as well as just kind of getting it better organized. The municipal code as it relates to the Traffic and Safety Commission is just clunky, and it needs to be fixed. It needs to be modernized.
You waited for me to be chair again, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, we'll get it. It'll be fine. Don't worry. I like working on those kinds of things. The last two you've heard a lot about, and we're working hard on the San Pablo and Buchanan complete streets. We'll be bringing back to you the next level of design in a few months, and then Justin just gave you a report on Solano Avenue, getting busy here in the next couple of months as well.
Line bike pilot reporting?
Was that in the fall?
6-month mark, I think, was September, October, so it's...
Was it that far out?
Or was it that was what I had down, if it's supposed to come to you.
We start in January?
It was at least February.
February?
But, so you have to get the data, and then you have to crunch the numbers, and so that seems...
Okay.
Well, what happens at the end of the pilot?
Yeah, do we have to do something?
Do they
to continue
take all
it,
the
or
bikes
kill
away
it, or-
if the 6 months
You can take all the bikes away anytime.
I know, but
There's no agreement in place.
That's a good question, right? So is the pilot going to continue despite what we...
I think discussing it and having a presentation from them at some point whether it's later this summer or early in the fall would be valuable. If we feel like we need to take a heavier hand in some sort of regulatory aspect of this, we've got to figure out a way to do that. Right now, again, back to the municipal code, we don't have anything that gives us regulatory authority over where people park their bikes.
But I think the first thing is just that we want to hear from them, because they came and spoke to us very forthrightly about what their plans were, and that covered a 6-month period, and I'd like to give them a chance to do that again before, I guess ideally just before the end of the 6 months.
Mhm.
We know what to expect, even if we don't have an opportunity to regulate at that moment.
Yeah, I agree.
So we'll get in touch with them and try to move that up into a June or July meeting, perhaps.
Okay.
They haven't hit us with scooters yet, so we have that.
On the regulatory side of it, I wouldn't know about passing any type of regulation or looking into that unless we knew there was a problem. So I don't know if that's like intern survey work and just going out with the app and saying where the bikes are parked, how they're parked. I mean, that's kind of like the hot issue these days, right? Is do they block the right of way? I mean, we have less of an issue here in Albany, but or
But
less
I think
volume
that
in
also
Albany.
should be complaint driven. If people aren't reporting it as a problem, then we probably don't need to do anything.
I don't know. I wonder.
I'm not aware that we've received any complaints. I haven't checked with the police department on this. But at least our department hasn't heard complaints about how the bikes are parked. We have heard concerns, and I think all of you have probably heard it too, of the lack of availability of bikes at times and locations where it would really be helpful for Albany residents.
It's worth mentioning that the bike lanes are in from Cornell to San Pablo on Marin. And not all the features that go along with those, like the pylons to help eastbound, help the merge, help avoid the merge, or help the merge avoid the bike lane. So I hope to see those fairly soon, because that's kind of important. But it's great to see that in, and I understand the last 2 blocks before San Pablo, at least, were fully paved instead of just resealed, which is part of why there were unevennesses in the pavement for a long time. They were waiting till they could get to the point where they could repave. And the city put extra money into that to have a full, nice surface there. And is that a reasonable description?
It would be great for Mark Hurley, our Public Works Director, to give you a full update on that. I think we were able, due to really good project management, able to save some money elsewhere in the contract that allowed us to do some of that paving work. So credit goes to the people who are out there every day who are counting materials and hours and so forth and making sure that we're getting value for the project. And Mark and his team deserve the credit for it and should give you a report on that maybe next month.
Hear, hear. Yeah. Any other announcements? May is Bike Month. There's a lot going on. Next one, a week from Wednesday is Bike to School Day at the elementary and middle schools. The day after, the 10th, is Bike to Work Day, and the strollers and rollers, along with the city and most of the city, are sponsoring the Energizer Station at Masonic and Marin under the Greenway. Love to see everybody there. There's also a bike rodeo later in the month put on by APAL, the Albany Police Activities League, and other celebrations. So enjoy Bike Month. And we'll see you at the end of it with our next meeting on May something.
24th?
May 24th. And with that, I'd like to close this meeting. Thank you all.